Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade. Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Grouville. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur. Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Tadier. Monsieur le deputy Luce.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Doublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Lehegera.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham. Madame le deputy Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Poré. Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Scott. Monsieur le deputy Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howe.
Présente.
Anytime we're ready. Well,
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac. Monsieur le deputy Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions que te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien tout soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de mettre à leur soin. Car nous t'en prions, au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Défaut.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Défaut.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Défaut.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Défaut.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Défaut.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier.
Défaut.
Monsieur le Deputy Farnham.
Défaut.
Madame la Deputy Poré.
Défaut.
Madame la Deputy Scott.
Deputy Scott has phoned to say she's in traffic and she's very sorry, and she wondered if she could possibly be excusée like Deputy Tadier was yesterday.
That was the policy that obtained yesterday, so I assume that's acceptable. Yes, excusez.
Sir,
Les États sont constitués? Yes. Who's first?
Yeah.
Yes, Deputy Barbara Ward.
Yes, sir. May I raise therefore on the Connétable for St Mary? Thank you.
Yes, the deferral is raised on the Connétable of St Mary.
And can I raise the default on Deputy Poré, sir?
Yes, the deferral is raised on Deputy Poré.
So the Constable of St Lawrence was defo, but members will be aware that she has suffered a bereavement. It may be because of that she's not here, so I've got no notice of that, but just in case.
I fully understand that, Deputy Joseph, but as she was here yesterday, I think one must assume that she's back, unless she informs us to the contrary.
Well, I'll find out, sir.
Yes, very well. We now continue with public business. As I mentioned yesterday before we arose, there is a matter that Deputy Scott wishes to bring before the Assembly at this sitting, and she first needs to make an application that the various lodging periods are waived. She's not present at the moment, but I understand Deputy Coles, she has asked you to make that part of her application and pending her arrival, and then the Assembly can decide when to take it after her arrival, if they agree to accept it. So would you like to do that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. As with the results of yesterday, we find ourselves in a situation where standing orders and the law requires that we appoint a new Chief Minister designate, as well as a new Council of Ministers. Unfortunately, this is falling in a point where many members, like myself, have already made plans to be off island next week. Some for just leisure reasons, as breaks aren't always possible during the Christmas period for some, and also for family reasons and other reasons that other members may have. So we request that we can bring forward P3 of Deputy Scott to allow the debate to take place on remote participation while members are actually off island for just this single instance. So I do move the proposition and hope members would support the early lodging.
So you are making movement for the early lodging and the fact that it be debated at this hearing, and very well. Is that proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on that proposition? Those in favour kindly show. Those against? The proposition is adopted, and therefore this matter will be listed. At the moment, it's not listed in any particular place, and the norm is that it will be positioned at the end of the order paper, but if Deputy Scott, when she arrives, urges upon members to take a different view, well, that's a matter for her, and we'll deal with that as and when it arises. Excuse me. I apologise for the cough that's been prevalent over yesterday and will continue to be so a little bit today, but I apologise for that. As if by way of illustration. Very well. The next is then the draft planning and building, excuse me, amendment number 8, repeal Jersey law, lodged by Deputy Balash, the main respondent with the Minister for Environment and Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Planning and Building Amendment number 8 repeal Jersey Law 2000, a law to repeal the Planning and Building Amendment number 8 Jersey Law 2022 The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
David Rash.
Sir, this might appear, after the drama of yesterday, to be a minor matter, but I think it embodies a significant principle. And that principle is that people in Jersey should be free to do what they would wish to do unless it is necessary in the interests of the community that that freedom should be curtailed. So all civilized people care about trees. The questions are how you protect trees, and indeed which trees you should protect. The answer to the last question, according to the Minister, is all trees, because that is what Amendment number 8, which I seek to repeal, provides. It provides that no work on any tree shall be done without planning permission. I have been accused of being alarmist. Alarmist nonsense is what the Minister called that statement. But it is not nonsense. It is what the law says. The law says, and I quote, to carry out on the land an operation to or involving a tree is development and requires planning permission. It is true that the Minister can, by order, accept operations from that requirement, and I shall come to that in a moment. But the starting point is that under Amendment number 8, work on any tree requires planning permission. One member said to me a few weeks ago that one needs planning permission to knock down a house. So what is the problem with extending that to trees? And that question goes to the heart of the problem. Before the occupation, anyone could buy a house in Jersey. Any landowner could develop his land as he wished without any permission from anyone. In 1949 and 1946, respectively, those freedoms were curtailed by the housing law and planning regulations, and rightly curtailed because the interests of the community required it. Since then, we have removed many other freedoms. You cannot have a dog without a license from the constable. You cannot use a surfboard without the permission of the government, and so on. We are probably the most highly regulated society in Western Europe. But that does not mean, in my view, that we should carelessly give up more freedoms. On the contrary, we should be very reluctant to give up any freedom unless the public interest absolutely requires it. I don't think, sir, that the Minister feels the same way. His ministerial comments state, I understand there are concerns regarding over-regulation. Note that the Minister does not seem to mind about over-regulation, but that he understands that there are concerns. In fact, my concerns are not about over-regulation, but about regulation itself, unless it is absolutely necessary. So I was asked to withdraw this proposition and I declined because I do not think that defining development to include any work on trees is the right approach. It is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It is a good thing that Projet 71 was withdrawn by the Minister because those proposals were frankly unworkable. It was fortunate that that proposition had not been adopted before Storm Ciarán hit the island. Just imagine the chaos in the planning department if permission were needed to work on any trees with a diameter of more than 25 centimetres unless covered by the exemptions set out in that law. At Longville, sir, past which I drive many days, there are 2 or 3 mature trees which have been ripped off by the storm at a height of about 10 feet. They were not dead, nor diseased, nor a danger to the public, nor damaging any building. It doesn't sound like routine management. As far as one can tell, none of the Minister's exceptions applied to them. So planning permission would have been required before they could be cut down or pollarded to remove the jagged edges. There must be thousands of such trees across the island, all of which would have required the intervention of officials before anything could be done about them. What a nightmare was narrowly avoided. The truth is that if you start from the position that work on any tree needs planning permission, unless it is exempted by order, you are starting in the wrong place. Defining development as including any work on trees was a clever legal construct, but it doesn't work in practice. I do not believe it is possible to think of all the circumstances in which people should not be allowed to work on trees without making any application to the authorities. There are a myriad such circumstances, too many. What would happen is that the orders would be drafted to make sure that the offending circumstances were caught, but that would inevitably suck in many unintended consequences. Why should law-abiding landowners, the vast majority of whom care about trees, have to go to the trouble and expense of applying for planning permission when they want to do something unexceptionable? I think that Amendment number 8 was misconceived, and that is why I am asking the states to repeal it. The professionals, architects, tree surgeons, countrymen, whose daily work involves working with and looking after trees, all, so far as I'm aware, think that Amendment number 8 is not the right approach, and their opinion must surely count for something. I want to say a few words in conclusion about how I think trees should be protected. The ministerial comments state that Deputy Balash seeks to repeal the potential use of the planning law to protect trees. And that is not correct. I made it clear in my report that the Minister's powers under Chapter 2 of the 2002 law to make a protected tree order are very important. I think, sir, that attention should be paid to the obligations of the Minister under Article 58 of the 2002 law. The article is headed Minister to protect trees by maintaining a list of protected trees, and the procedure is set out quite clearly. To cut down or damage a protected tree is a criminal offence, and an offender is liable to an unlimited fine. But to make it work, one needs to know precisely which trees are protected. I don't wish to be impolite, but the current list of protected trees on the government website could generously be described as woefully inadequate. If one goes to the list, the first item on the list of 71 describes the protected tree in this way: intention to provisionally list. There are several fine specimen trees, especially the monkey puzzle tree. And that is it. Has it or have they been provisionally listed? It's not possible to say. Which tree has been protected, if any? Article 58 states clearly that the description should be sufficient to identify the tree. If properly operated, the list of protected trees is a very effective way of protecting special trees. A tree can be provisionally listed very quickly if there is a perceived risk of felling, and once a tree has been listed, no one can cut it down, lop it, or damage it in any way. In summary, Sir, Amendment number 8 is flawed. It would be an administrative nightmare because the pressures on an already stressed planning department would be greatly increased to the detriment of the public. Controlling work on thousands of trees will inevitably require more civil servants when many people are saying that our bureaucracy is growing too much. And finally, it would be an unnecessary intrusion on the freedoms of our fellow islanders. Unnecessary because there is no evidence of a problem which cannot be addressed through the existing law. I hope, sir, that members will agree that Amendment number 8 is flawed and should be repealed. I move the principles of the bill.
Very much. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles?
Sir, may I raise the defo on Deputy Farnham, please?
Yes, the defo is raised on Deputy Farnham. Yes, indeed. Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. Members will be pleased to know that I have very little to add because I thank Deputy Balash for his opening speech, and as ever, he says everything I would say in a far better and more eloquent manner than I could ever possibly wish to. Sir, when I first saw this draft legislation come across my desk, and I'm looking back at the date here, the 25th of April 22, so it's nearly 2 years ago, I went home and wrote a very long speech, which took quite a bit of finding because it's so long ago now, but it was certainly very angry, it was very incensed, and I don't intend to use it today. But Deputy Balash is right. This is not alarmist nonsense. This is absolutely necessary, what we do today, because this proposition to protect trees, and I use that in inverted commas, is unnecessary. I'm going to be very brief. It is my view that this has been brought about by 1 or 2 cases where unscrupulous developers have taken down trees inside development sites for their own benefit. And in hindsight, those trees should have been protected. Maybe we should have seen that coming. But this law, this proposal from the Environment Minister isn't the way to solve this issue, as Deputy Balash has outlined. There's a lot of money that's been spent on this already. If that money had been put towards subsidising tree planting and maybe the cost of civil servants adding some more trees to the listed trees list, it would be completely unnecessary. We have laws in place already, as the Deputy said. I'm not going to go on, sir. I think we should just move on with this as quickly as we can. We should reject it completely out of hand, get on. I don't see this as a move about the environment. I see this as a move about control, and I would reject it wholeheartedly.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Connétable Trinity.
Thank you, sir. Before I do, could I just raise the defo on the Constable of St Brellards?
It's already been raised, I think, but yes, certainly.
And St Lawrence, sir.
Oh, and
Constable of St Lawrence.
Absolutely. Thank you
And
very much.
yes, sir, just to say that I stand as guilty as agreeing to bring this matter under the scope of the planning law, and I realise that it was a rather heavy-handed approach to protecting trees, and I will be absolutely supporting the Deputy in his proposition today. Thank you.
Any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I think I don't think we should rush into this. We need to think about this. First of all, the current situation, and I thank the Solicitor General for some information earlier to just give me some clarity, is that a preservation order is needed, and it was interesting to hear Deputy Balash say that and I wrote it down, and I'm in the same boat of having very poor handwriting as a number of others in this assembly, so now I've got to read. It's woeful, I think the phrase was, of how preservation orders are currently established. That should ring an alarm bell to say that actually the system we have at the moment is not protecting our environment. It was interesting to hear Deputy Luce say one or two developers may have got rid of some trees they shouldn't have. This is very significant, sir, because I think if you remove all protection in this way and just wait for the preservation orders process, which is woeful, that is just a free rein to have, if you like, so a wild west of development and not worry about what happens to our environment. And we have an issue here. What the law that was coming through, the policy that was coming through, and this is a policy issue, was that all trees will be protected automatically and there will be carve-outs for specific areas. So, for example, and this is the way I understand it, perhaps the ministers can speak later and confirm this. So the carve-outs, for example, in your garden, particular size trees, particular areas, would mean it a lot easier to just get on. You wouldn't have to go through that process. That blanket protection is something, and this is where the crux of the issue is. And it does seem to be that what we have is a strangely libertarian approach, and we have to be very careful when we take that libertarian approach to our environment, because we have to think, where does it stop? We have marine protection areas. I think they're very good because they're necessary. They're not liked by everybody, but they're necessary. We have protection areas for biodiversity on this island, which are absolutely vital. And the protection of trees in our environment, and we all know in towns, in cities, in St Helier, for example, which is not green enough, the protection of trees in that area is far more important than we realise. The protection of trees in our cities to provide shade and healthy air for us to breathe, etc., is vital. I would be very wary of taking a preemptive strike to say we will remove all protection and just use what we have at the moment and hope it works, under the notion that that is freedom. So I think that is a very strange sense of what freedom means, because the freedom for those who own to do whatever they want with something that is vital for our environment is a different issue. And we have some difficult choices to make. Do we have the freedom to remove from our environment essential parts of our environment? And my question would be, I'm afraid that what is needed from government is some clarity in that area. Now, I would like to have seen the policy coming forward in depth rather than just being removed, if I'm absolutely honest. So we could have had that debate in this assembly and that policy developed and scrutiny looking at that policy and developing that policy in detail, rather than just removing blanketly this provision within the law. And I do worry that if we do this, we are left with nothing. Now, if preservation orders are the way forward, and that's great, what I would like to have seen is something added to this which says that this is the process of preservation orders that we will therefore move to. Or a direction to the minister to say, you know, in Part B, you will develop in the next 6 months protection orders which come to the Assembly, which are adequate for us to say, therefore we can remove this after that is done. At the moment, we are at risk of voting to leave nothing. And if we leave nothing, we lose that protection en masse. And I would be very concerned about that. And even if that's a short-term loss of protection, Development on this island, in my opinion, is often not as controlled as it should be because the driver, and I can understand why, it's a business, is to make money. And even within the Bridging Island plan, we allow, in St Helier, for example, developments to be made and say, well, yes, you have to provide some sort of green space. It doesn't have to be on the development. It can be anywhere. It can be down the road somewhere. It can be over somewhere else. And so we have flawed systems. And so what we have to do, sir, and I believe this is the key, is to develop those systems, and what government does needs to be effective, it needs to be accepted, and it needs to be understood fully, rather than just throwing everything away. And finally, sir, I would just say that in removing en masse a law in this way, what we end up with is a vacuum. And whenever there is a vacuum, it will be stepped into and exploited. And I think we have to be incredibly careful of allowing that to happen. I think this is a very rushed decision, and we need to prevent this. And I think it would have been a good idea for the Deputy to either postpone or remove this and have some sort of contact with the Minister and whoever becomes Minister, because we are at a time of change. And so there is an opportunity there to make these changes rapidly for somebody whoever steps into that position who might want to make change. So I think this is the wrong time for this, and I unfortunately therefore have to say I would urge members to reject this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Dubé.
Thank you, sir. Yesterday, a flippant remark was made by a member, I can't remember exactly who it was, about frivolous items on the order paper and trees being one of them. And I was actually aghast to hear that, because whilst there are lots of important things that this Assembly deals with, that if the planet that we're living on isn't the most important thing, then I don't actually know what is. And I admire the Deputy who's bringing this proposition. I actually admire his faith in human nature, because much of his argument rests on the fact that we should trust people and have faith in people to keep the trees that are growing on their land. And as a humanist, I applaud that point of view. But I'm also a realist, and I want to remind members that we are in a state of climate emergency. And I believe that whoever is going to be the Environment Minister should continue working to protect trees. I'm not sure if I've used this before, sir, but this is a saying that some of the young people use. And imagine if trees gave off Wi-Fi signals. We'd be planting so many, we'd probably save the planet. But it's too bad they only produce the oxygen we breathe. And this law, I think much of the purpose of this law will be almost like the seatbelt law, okay? It's a culture change law. It's an indication to our citizens that trees are very important for some really obvious reasons, which I think we all are behind, aren't we? None of us want climate change to continue at the pace it's continuing. It's a culture change law, and I'm sure the Environment Minister, whoever he or she is going to be, will take on board some of the feedback from landowners and bring something forward that will work towards tackling climate change whilst respecting the views of those landowners. But just to bring members back to the importance of trees, and I reflected on the Youth Parliament, because of course we should be listening to our young people. They're the ones who are going to be living well beyond us and living on this planet, and we have a duty to safeguard this planet for them. Indeed, as an Assembly, we have a duty to think about their rights. And Article 24 of the UNCRC states that every child, amongst other things, every child has the right to a clean environment. So we have a duty to safeguard the environment for them. And I have some words from the Youth Parliament, some of which, actually, I'm looking at the document they produced, the previous Youth Parliament. At least one of these children was in my class when I was a reception teacher. And Cal said, biodiversity and trees are the most important thing about this world. Without them, we couldn't exist. We couldn't have food or materials. I think biodiversity is the most important thing we should be worrying about. Ava says, I think it is important to protect our environment because it provides us with things that the younger generation might not have due to deforestation and rising sea levels. So please, Sarah, I implore members to listen to Cal and Ava and the other young people who would like to have a planet to live on, and I reject this today so that we can actually come back with something that will protect our trees and protect our children's future.
Much, Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir.
I think, no, you're defo, excuse me, that's fine.
Yes, thank you, and my apologies for arriving late to the States Assembly. Thank you for excusing me. I think already I've identified some misunderstandings about where we are in terms of the original regulations that the law that this proposition is proposing to repeal, which actually hasn't been implemented yet. So there isn't, approving this proposition won't actually create a vacuum. It doesn't actually change anything because the law has not been implemented. And I happen to have quite a bit of knowledge of the background of the law, which I will, as briefly as possible, share with States members, because basically I accept we all love trees, and I have worked with 3 ministers for the environment now in respect of tree protection, raising my concerns in my former role before becoming a States member, as known as a somewhat feisty chair of the St Brellard's Bay Association, who raised a general concern that the development of an area of the island was insensitive, and they weren't actually against the development, contrary to what some people might say. They just wanted it to be done sensitively for a key tourist attraction. And one of the things that they raised was the extent to which trees had been planted extensively in the area to beautify the area after the devastation of the, I think it was a 1987 hurricane. And all these trees have been planted as an incredible piece of work, the 1989 St Brellard's Bay Environmental Improvement Plan. And then what people were seeing were these trees were coming down because the bay happened to be attracting developers who wanted to create sea views for luxury houses, and the current planning law and the way in which trees were protected weren't sufficient. Maybe some States members remember what part of the fuss that was made about a fig tree in the Wayside car park, on which there had been a tree protection order, but whoosh, it just went with the whole development. So I, on behalf of the association, worked with 3 ministers of environment, basically saying these things need to be improved. And one of them, the former Minister for Environment, was Deputy John Young, who was a deputy of St Brelard, who basically said, well, he would be working on a tree strategy, and in the meantime, he would seek to bring in a temporary provision that perhaps provided some blanket protection. Now, I had no input in that. I had no hand in the content of it, but basically what we are debating now, I believe, was his proposed solution. And there are some problems with that, one of which is it's not actually temporary, it's not expressed to be temporary. But also, the fact remains, and I've very much taken on board what Deputy Rob Ward said, that perhaps it would have been more ideal if this proposition had been debated after a proposition that I have brought to myself on tree protection, which is to be debated in the next States Assembly, and that's proposition P.98. 2023, which I did briefly discuss with Deputy Balash, but and which has been amended, but we didn't really have any further discussion about a strategy in terms of how this was put forward. I have also discussed the contents of P98 with the Minister for the Environment, which has led to my deferring that debate until the next States meeting. But basically, just to come back to that where we are, in terms of the alternative, what was worked on before the current Minister for Environment took his position was a tree strategy. And I know members might think that praise doesn't come from me easily, but this was a really impressive piece of work. And it's quite amazing how it was done, because it was actually done, I believe, during the lockdown, or certainly during lockdown, I recall. And it involved extensive collaboration with many different stakeholders regarding trees. It involved the farmers. I was involved as a community representative, that you had the National Trust, charities, an amazing amount of knowledge, a collection of people who knew about trees and the problems we were having in protecting them, and the concerns about being too heavy-handed, because frankly, some people just plant a tree in the wrong place and they don't realise, and then it needs to come down. And one of the kind of questions is, should they be penalised for that by, if they want to bring it down, having to go and pay for a planning permission, these sort of thing? To be honest, that wasn't really part of the debate, because none of us quite knew what the Minister was proposing in the background. So it produced this tree strategy, which my proposition does refer to. I've actually got to commend the Chief Officer who was involved in this, because, as I said, it was incredibly well structured. It was one of those collaborations, and it doesn't always happen with planning, unfortunately, where people did really feel involved, and that's very important with this community. So, and what it proposed was some actions which did include working on the current tree protection provisions that are in the planning law, and coming up with some ways of better providing that in these situations where outside the countryside, where you've got developers who might be tempted to just raise some beautiful trees in perhaps in the suburban area, even an urban area, that there would be some way of countering that. And so I have come to listen quite carefully to the arguments about why we would carry on with the proposal that Deputy Young came up with at the time. And I am actually in favour of the proposition that Deputy Balash has brought. And that's because of the mechanism that this that the law that this proposition now is trying to repeal actually entails. Again, it's a bit technical. I doubt that States members who did approve the original law thought it through too much. But what we have learned, many of us as States members, is that the law generally creates this blanket. If you are going to if you're going to fell or deal with a tree or perform an operation on a tree, that is a development operation. And generally, you must get planning permission to deal with that tree. That's every single tree. And then it allows certain operations to be excluded by ministerial order. That is if the law is implemented, which it isn't yet. And that ministerial order, States Assembly does not actually have any control. I think it's a ministerial decision, actually. No, it's a ministerial order. Anyway, it's a mechanism which we don't really have a control over. And it's a ministerial order, sorry, yes. We could actually repeal it, but if we did, you're in danger of having a much more a drastic, just basically this general provision that all trees however you dealt with them, it would be development. So you more or less would have to accept whatever ministerial order comes up first, just to have any exemptions. And if you didn't like the ministerial order, well, you know, you're in real danger if you actually get it repealed. So it's a very unsatisfactory way of dealing with what is, you know, a complex issue, a sensitive issue. Even now, I have been discussing, I discussed some concerns, I believe, that possibly the Jersey Trees Association might have too, with the Minister about the current content that we'd seen in the current ministerial order in terms of certain trees that it might not include, because trees, of course, come in different shapes and sizes. And what essentially I believe this community wants to do is protect special trees, heritage trees, trees that are really loved in certain places, and trees in certain areas, in certain environments, but being mindful of generally that we want to encourage people to plant trees, and you're in real danger that that's not going to happen if you're basically saying, well, at any time you might be exposed to a law that says you've got to pay if you do that, and go through the planning system and all these things. So as I say, I hope that when we come to the point of debating the provision that the proposition that I'm bringing, hopefully at the next state sitting, that I might have some support in improving tree protection that way. And in the meantime, I urge States members to support Deputy Balash's proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I fear Jersey's just entered the culture wars. I also fear that I believe there's been a great deal of misunderstanding, as I understand it, about this law. And that's the bit which really concerns me. This law was actually brought in by former Deputy Gregory Guida, who is certainly a deputy who, in every conversation I spoke to him, very much anti-regulation. He was not somebody who was in this assembly choosing to bring forward regulations for the sake of regulations. He was almost certainly aligned with Deputy Balash on that item or that matter. And we all know that the orders that were being brought in or attempting to be brought in by the Environment Minister caused a great deal of consternation. And I understand that, and I believe there was validity to those concerns, no question. And obviously, the Environment Minister then chose to withdraw them. Now, my understanding of the law as it is here today is quite simply that it gives the Minister powers to make these orders. And the Minister can choose how to define trees, how to define which trees, not how to define trees, but how to define which trees are to be protected. That could be everything from the age of the trees, the size of the trees, the species of the trees. So it gives the Minister, and in fact, I believe it could be used to protect individual trees. It gives the Minister that ability. Now, I believe it was in the making of the orders that the current Minister made errors, kind of effectively political errors. The scope was far too large. But this is a case of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because whilst we may fall back on tree protection orders, because they do, I understand it, remain in law as it stands, they are close to utterly useless. That is the real issue I have here. So why did Deputy Guida want to bring this law forward? Because he understood that the current tree protection order regime is useless. And, Deputy Scott has already referred to it, the fig tree in St Brillard's Bay was a really good example of how utterly useless the tree protection order's current system is. And what happened, as I understand it there, was there was a fig tree that was protected for whatever reason. It doesn't matter, don't know. I can't remember. And one day it disappeared. the chief officer who is under the current law, the chief officer of planning, is the kind of guardian of that law, and so is the guardian of protected trees. It is the chief officer who chooses whether a protected tree should be delisted or listed if it isn't yet protected. And yet, when I made inquiries, the chief officer had done no such thing in this case. The chief officer had not said, take away the tree protection order on that fig tree. Because a planning application had come in, and these were pretty much the words that were said to me at the time, well, the planning application didn't show the tree. And so when that planning application was passed, that tree was no longer protected. And so whilst the planning application did not refer to the tree, it just showed it as being not on the plans. Nobody, or very few people, would have realised that that tree was going to be for the chop, despite it having a tree protection order on it. And that really showed the weakness, the massive hole in the current tree protection order regime. There are other holes. You have to identify individual trees. Somebody has to be motivated to identify individual trees. They have to find out then how to protect that tree, because believe me, it doesn't make it clear on the government website how to do that. And so we have, going off Deputy Balash's words, a mere 71 trees in Jersey that are protected. Would any of us really know what to do if we liked a tree, thought a tree was particularly fine? Now, we do know, as Deputy Dublé has said, trees are essential for life. I mean, they are. It is that simple. Landowners do not always value the trees. Deputy Balash can say it, but I have spoken to landowners who treat trees and view trees as weeds on their land. They see trees as in their way. Now, that is not all landowners. This is one or two landowners that I have spoken to, but that has been said to me. And so it cannot be the case that we all see trees equally. Some people don't care for them. Some people we know care immensely for them. But when a tree is cut down, the one thing you really don't know is who appreciates that tree. Now, if you wake up every morning and you're in your kitchen having your breakfast and there's a tree on somebody else's land just over the road but visible from your kitchen, and one day that tree disappears, that has an impact on you. It can have a severe impact on some people. They've enjoyed the squirrels running through those trees, they've enjoyed the birds landing, nesting, roosting in those trees. They've enjoyed the whole ecosystem that exists around that tree. And so, effectively, I think I really kind of agree with Deputy Ward here. The issue really was that the Environment Minister brought forward the wrong orders. It wasn't that this particular law in itself is wrong. Now, this law could perhaps be changed so that instead of bringing in orders, it should be, something which passes through the Assembly. That would have been perhaps a better way forward. So then you could debate whether those regulations were right or wrong. But because this current tree protection regime, in my view, is so unbelievably weak as to be close to useless, I find the idea of just throwing out a law, which I know came from a gentleman who was proposed by a gentleman who was completely anti-regulation or more regulation. He did not want the proliferation of regulation. I do not want the proliferation of regulation. I have been very, very worried about Jersey losing, or potentially has lost, that fleet-footed, nimble agility that we talk about, because we have covered ourselves in regulation. And regardless of what happens over the next week or so, I will continue to say that no, Jersey cannot bring in more regulations. And so, in this case, it is about the Environment Minister, this law as it stands on the books today, if it was to be brought in, it is about the Environment Minister getting it right and making sure that the protection of trees is proportionate. And that was the mistake that was made. but it is not the law that it is the mistake. It is the way the Environment Minister chose to bring, the orders that the Environment Minister chose to consult on, actually. I believe it was consultation. I'm not sure if he was bringing it in. He was actually asking for people's opinions. Those opinions were given overly forcefully, in my view. And so I really do ask members to think very carefully. The tree protection regime that we have in place at the moment is inadequate. It does not and will not serve the purpose that it is apparently there for. The current law that hasn't quite been brought in, this Amendment number 8 law, does give powers to the Environment Minister to protect trees. Obviously, the States Assembly can call in an order at any time and can debate it as well. And for me, that is where the role of the Assembly really should be. It is in policing the order-making power of the Minister to make sure that those orders are proportionate. I am concerned about the signal this would send to younger people, because I started by mentioning culture wars, and there is no question that the younger generation in Jersey, as around the world, are deeply concerned about the environment. The younger generation, as we know, find it hard to engage with politics. They find it hard to understand why we do things which, in their views, are harmful to the environment. And so I would question the message that repealing this, what would it send to the younger generation, the people who actually will be living here for 70 years? I won't be here for another 70 years. That's really simple, but my daughter is likely to be, and her friends and so on. So I just ask members to think really carefully about, is there not a better way? Yesterday, I made an argument to say we need to collaborate a lot more. I feel and I fear that this proposition is set to create more division. Rather than working together to find a better solution, it just says throw something out and rest on a law which has proven over decades, or however long it's been in, to be utterly inadequate. So, sir, thank you.
Very much. Deputy Conetable St Brillard.
Sorry, can I raise the defo on Deputy Tadier? We forgot to do it earlier.
Yes, defo is raised. Conetable St Brillard.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the previous speaker, who I know has strong connections with Trees for Life in Jersey, who are really an authority here. I have to hold my hands up, sir, to the Assembly by saying that I was responsible as a result of some previous experience in bringing Amendment 21 to the 21 government plan, I think it was, to give some funding to the protection of trees, and that was successfully accepted. That so was stimulated by some concern, I think probably going back to the previously mentioned wayside fig, I might call it, with which I was familiar. And I just did scrape up the correspondence which I had at the time regarding that, and it was quite interesting in that in that particular case, the minister had determined the matter under appeal and was advised in that respect by a planning inspector. The planning inspector, having considered all material factors in his report to the minister, addressed the issues of trees and replacement planting in paragraph 75 of his report. At the end of that, it says the department has raised no issues in relation to the loss of the trees. There was clearly, I think, fault in that decision-making process. So that was added to a little bit later during our ongoing discussions regarding the use of the Overdale site for a future hospital, whereby on a visit, together with others, I noted that alongside the old McKinstry ward, there was this magnificent Turkey oak tree. And it in fact is called the President's Oak. It was planted in 1937 in celebration of the opening of Overdale as an isolation hospital. I did consider, sir, we should perhaps look at renaming it the Farnham Oak at that time, but we've moved on from that particular discussion. It's a magnificent oak. So at that point, I was trying to establish whether, in fact, it was protected. And I did discuss this point with the department. And clearly it wasn't. And the officer at the time gave me advice as to how that might take place. And it really is quite convoluted. And I felt at the time that we needed to do something about it. And I remember being told when I got to the next stage, oh, we can't do anything because there's no funding. So that led to the amendment to the government plan. So having done that, I know the department's been working on bringing bringing it into law. And I did discuss this at the time with Deputy Guida and Deputy Young, who were both keen on having something in statute to give some sort of protection. In parallel to this, there I witnessed the cutting down by a large, well-known developer of magnificent blue cedar on a property not far from where I live, and another not far again from where I live. Some magnificent beech trees are under threat. So I have to say so when I hear chainsaws starting up, it does fill me with horror. I believe so the Minister is going the right direction, but clearly the feedback from industry and the public in general has indicated that that direction is not to their liking. He's adjusted the proposals, the law, which is, I think, more practical. I so wonder whether that is the right direction, but I think that in truth, we've got to get these tree protection orders right. I don't believe they do exist at the moment as such as tree protection orders. So it is a planning permit, but not in the way in which it used to exist up to a number of years ago. They were got rid of for whatever reason. So clearly that was a mistake. The UK set up whereby if a landowner or developer cuts trees down, an advantage is created, and there can be a financial fine balanced with the increase in value by the views being created is an area for consideration. Difficult to manage, I would think. So in summary, I think that we need to find some sort of palatable structure for protecting our more important trees. Nobody wants to control what landowners do on their own land, but some of our more magnificent specimens really do need protection. I have looked in depth at trees. In fact, my grandfather was a dendrologist, and he travelled the UK listing big trees, and I have some of his old tomes, and there really are some magnificent trees in the country. When you get to trees at 100 and 200 years old, you don't really want to see them cut down. So in answer to this, this proposition, I would like to hear from the proposer how he anticipates the protection of trees being dealt with. By accepting this proposition, are we walking away and leaving it as it is, which I believe is unsatisfactory, or is he going to propose a different direction forward to support the Minister in protecting our very important trees? Thank you, sir.
Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I agree. I think we're all agreed that we all love trees. This may sound trivial because there's many times I turn the news on and feel that I want to cry with what's on TV. But one of the pieces of news that hit me absolutely, I would use the word devastatingly, this year was the news that someone had gone out and cut down the tree at Sycamore Gap. I almost have no words for how awful that was. I've been to see that tree many times. My brother lives nearby. He's worked in forestry his whole life. I'm sure he was also devastated. We've also seen reports from, I can't remember if it was Portsmouth or Plymouth, where people were protesting because the council had come out in the middle of the night and cut down a line of very well-established trees in the city centre. Some years ago, in the late 90s, I went to Peru. We ended up in a town, I think it may have been Cusco, where there were people protesting, and in a square, trees were balanced on stumps and supported by scaffolding. And exactly the same thing had happened. The council or the local authority had come out in the middle of the night and cut down the trees. And the people were so incensed, they'd gone, propped them back up on the stumps and were protesting against the council. And my point in saying all that is that despite the fact that we all love trees, it is very clear that people do, as a matter of fact, do really stupid, thoughtless, incomprehensible things where trees are concerned. Constable St Brelad has just given us some very good local examples. So I do believe that we need some protection for trees. I have a small garden which has quite a large tree. It's a beautiful tree. It's a flowering cherry tree. In May, it looks absolutely stunning. And in the last 20 years that I've lived there, we've gone out, we've had gardeners come in twice to prune the tree, because otherwise I wouldn't see out the upstairs windows. I've read from my understanding of what the Minister's proposing in terms of exemptions and controls, my maintenance of that tree in my garden would not be caught. It's nonsense to suggest I would have to go and get planning permission to prune a tree that really needs pruning in my own garden. I don't believe that's the Minister's intention. I have also, when all the news first broke on this and people became agitated, I thought, oh, there's that other thing. And I went out to check whether I would need to get planning permission to remove something. But I'm also satisfied it's just a large shrub and that I don't need planning permission to remove that. I'm sure the Minister will say more, but I believe in developing his initial proposals, there was a public consultation to which over 3,000 people responded. They all agreed with the strategy of enhanced protection for trees. And this seems to be a perennial problem. We have a consultation, ministers come up with proposals based on that consultation, based on the support of that consultation, and then another group of people who perhaps didn't participate become aware of it and object. We come across this many times. But to give the Minister his absolute credit, he has listened to that and he has adjusted the rules, and he said he will do so again to make sure that we do get it right. But I do think on the basis of the idiocy that we see regarding trees, as I will use that word, and the fact that people do things for their own benefit that just the rest of us will never understand. I do agree that we need to have some degree of protection for trees. We need to find a way of doing that, and I will be supporting this proposition.
Very much. Deputy Conitable of Greville.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Conitable.
Thank you very much. I support very much the proposal. Having spent most of my life in the farming industry, many of whom have spent a great deal of time and effort planting trees, and indeed looking out of my office window at a very grey and dull day today, sir. In the old days, many of the farmers who had large staff teams on such a day would have found an odd job for their staff to do. They should have been planting spuds in the coaties, sir, but today they'd have been planting trees or some other job. And I was very disturbed to hear that many of them would not do so in the future because they would be worried that they would have to get planning permission to trim these trees when they got to a certain size. I indeed, sir, in my own capacity as a landowner and farmer in the old days, used to plant trees on such an occasion. And in fact, I planted hundreds of my own, 100 of which I planted specifically for firewood. And again, they're getting to the size at which I'd require planning permission to do that. And sir, my most disturbing contribution to this was a very large landowner's estate manager said to me, having planted over 1,000 trees last year alone, said to me that he would be reticent to consider carrying on with such a matter because of this law. And that disturbed me greatly, sir. I really do think that we should enhance our current legislation. As previous speakers have said, the protection of trees needs to be tightened up. Deputy Murrell and everyone should be working towards that. and the tightening of such legislation and not introducing legislation that could actually stunt the future planting of trees. And that very much concerns me, sir. And thank you for letting me speak.
Very much. Deputy Reniff.
Thank you, sir. I find myself in a slightly strange position as responding as the Minister when I will not be the Minister and not be bringing these forward. So to respond as the Minister in these circumstances is slightly strange, and my speech as a result is slightly more complicated and than the one I had prepared. I do want to go into it in a little bit of depth, however, because I do think that the proposals have been misunderstood. I take my share of responsibility for that. But I do think it's important to understand the context in which we got to this position and why, actually, I think it's a very simple decision to reject this proposition, because it does nothing more than keep a theoretical power in our back pockets for if we might want to use it in the future, should the Assembly wish to do so. So when I cycled in this morning, I came around St. Aubyn's Bay, a rather wet cycle ride. And as you look towards town, the view that you see is made up of three elements. There is what you might call the base geology, the low-lying bay area, the escarpment, the valleys. These have been shaped by millions of years of geological processes and constitute what is known as our geo-heritage, now being recognised by the listing of a number of sites around the island, which allow us to protect those sites which are of particular geo-heritage significance. Then the next thing you see are the buildings, the homes, hotels, offices, and so on. These elements of the built environment are part of our cultural heritage. And again, we protect our cultural heritage in a variety of different ways through planning controls, listing, and soon conservation areas. And finally, the third element that makes up the view are the trees, climbing up the escarpment and marching across the skyline. These are part of our natural heritage, and their value has been increasingly recognised over the last few years. Yet this element of our environment is the least protected. That is the context in which proposals for greater tree protection have been under consideration over the last few years. So the questions that arise are, do we need better protection for trees? And if so, what is the best way by which it can be achieved? Before I get to those points, I do want to say something about the context in which we're discussing this matter. I am a minister in name only, and this matter will be taken forward by a new minister. Had I been carrying this matter forward, I would have made clear that I would have withdrawn proposals under Amendment 8 and that I wish to start afresh considering this matter. I'm therefore in a slightly unusual situation in that I'm arguing for the retention of a law that I said I would have had no current intention to use. But as I've said earlier, I think the important thing is that we keep it as in reserve. It is a power that we need to keep as an option, and I'm going to explain why I think that is. So it is worth acknowledging, however, that one of the many reasons why I think those proposals should be put on hold for now is the impact of Storm Ciarán. And I accept, as I'm sure most members of the Assembly do, that this is not the time to be discussing tree protection in the manner that we had, because the people who deal with trees have the matter of dealing with the storm aftermath, which for most of us going about our daily lives we may tend to forget, but is still very much going on. And I've been having to take cycling detours on my way to work because the railway walk is closed in sections because some of that work is still going on and will be for some time, and many landowners will be dealing with that. It is not right that we should be asking them to also think about the details of planning protection. But having said that, I'm still going to argue strongly against P90, which would repeal the part of Amendment 8 to the Planning and Building Law that relates to tree protection. My argument is that it is a disproportionate step to take, that it is not necessary, and that it would remove potentially useful options that could be used in the future. The key safeguard here is that nothing can be enacted through the Amendment number 8 route without the approval of the Assembly. That is why I say that P90 is unnecessary. There are already safeguards in place. So the nub of the argument is that we need to consider whether we have enough protection for trees currently available. Currently, there are only two protective mechanisms available to stop trees being felled. The first, which hasn't been mentioned so far, is through the wildlife law. It is illegal to fell a tree in which there is a nest, squirrel, bat, or most bird species nest or home, if you like, even if the nest is inactive. This is to protect the habitat which that tree clearly represents to a protected species. In simple terms, the tree is a home of an animal that we are trying to protect. This is, however, only a very limited protection for two reasons. First, in practice, unless someone spots the tree is about to be felled before it is felled, sees that it has a nest, and is able to point this out to the person doing the felling or to the authorities, it is very difficult to use. Rummaging around in the detritus of a fallen tree to find a nest may provide some evidence, but it is unlikely. I was contacted last year by someone who took photos of a tree before it was felled that clearly showed a nest in the upper part of the tree before it was cut down. But when officers investigated, there was not enough evidence to prove that the nest didn't come from one of the few species that are not protected, such as crows. And second, of course, trees are only protected where a nest is present. So in other words, that protection is a byproduct of being a habitat. It's not a protection in itself of the tree. And the second means of protection is the listing of trees. Now, the key point about the listing of trees is that it requires anticipation. We need to know in advance what tree or trees we wish to protect. That is fine in some cases. For example, spectacular specimen trees that are known and loved in the landscape. Trees for which there is a known threat. However, there are many cases where trees have great value that may not be immediately obvious and cannot therefore be listed. The tree strategy that Deputy Scott referenced, that was produced in 2022, identified many different ways in which trees might be valuable, but not immediately visibly valuable. So there is a section in that which talks about the value and benefit of trees. And it talks about the importance of them for nature. That's fairly obvious, I think. Through their life cycle, trees, woods and hedgerows provide corridors and habitats for wildlife, plants and insects. And again, this point about corridors is important. One of the things that legislation may be able to do, working in conjunction with the wildlife law, would be to ensure that wildlife corridors were preserved. A landowner may not know in advance that their trees form part of that corridor, but an approach that, along the lines that was outlined through the planning route might enable that to be done. Might. For resilience and climate change, as Deputy Doublé has already talked about, to reduce soil erosion and increase soil quality. And this is a particularly relevant example on the anniversary, as it is today, of the Granvaux floods. We have spent quite a lot of time thinking about how we can prevent or mitigate floods like Granvaux in the future. And a key part of that is likely to be through nature-based solutions. It is likely to be through managing the catchment to slow the passage of water into the Granvaux Valley. And that might be done by preserving hedgerows, preserving trees which have root systems which hold water, and slowing down the release of water. Now, we cannot possibly wander around the Granvaux catchment listing every single tree to do so, because we have to remember that listing is an exceptionally draconian form of regulation. It prevents all work and requires a process, a considerably complex process of appeal to be delisted before it can be felled. So listing is not the answer in places where you cannot go around listing every tree without creating a very high regulatory burden. So there is, again, the potential here. And I say the potential because, as I've said, at the moment, certainly as I was minister, I would not have had plans to bring that forward without much further consultation. To add nature and beauty to built-up areas, roads, and other routes. Trees soften the environment. They bring birdsong, dappled shade. These things are valuable in society, and they are part of a community benefit. And I think Deputy Balash is right to highlight that there is an element here of principal debate, which is about the balance between individual property rights and community interest. And I think there is a valid community interest in these areas like flood protection, like the amenity value of trees. They have a value for people. And we should acknowledge that that conflict exists. If Deputy Balash's propositions succeed, then we are essentially saying that aside from a few listed trees, that conflict is resolved in favour of the landowner. They may do what they wish with their trees. As I say, I think that we need to consider other ways of bringing the community interest into this, and the planning system is one way of doing that. There may be other ways, which is why I said I wanted to consult more widely. In an era of climate change, of course, trees also provide a climate benefit. They provide shelter in a built-up environment. They provide shade. They, as I've mentioned already, slow down runoff when we're expecting more flooding situations. So the reasons for protecting not just through the listing route are that listing cannot capture all the eventualities. We cannot anticipate work, and it would be a draconian response to spread the listing of trees too far. I am absolutely certain that we can do more with listing of trees. We absolutely can, and whoever takes the environment portfolio next should do that work. And I think that is something it's already underway, in fact, in the department, as is work on the tree sounding board and other aspects of the tree strategy. That is necessary and good work that should be done. But even if it is done to the satisfaction of Deputy Balash and others, it will not capture all the circumstances in which we might want to protect trees. There will need to be something beyond just listing. And all this proposition, all the Amendment number 8 to the planning law does is create a possibility for that to happen in the future. The final point I'd make is that it took a long while to devise Amendment number 8. It went through, it was called in by scrutiny, it was amended itself. A lot of thought went into it, and it was adopted with only one dissent at the time it was passed. It was not adopted lightly. It was not a casual moment. It was the result of a lot of consideration. I think we should be thinking very carefully before we throw away a power that was created with that degree of thought, with that degree of consideration of all the issues. So I would say that if this proposition passes, the problem will be that when we are contacted by constituents or islanders who say, why was that tree cut down? Why didn't you do something about it? The answer, if this proposition passes, will have to be, well, I'm sorry, that is a matter for the landowner. We didn't know the tree was under threat. We didn't realise that it was important, so there's nothing we could do. That will be the situation if we pass this proposition. I think we should reject this proposition. We should keep Amendment number 8 in our back pockets, if you like. We don't have to use it. The Assembly remains in control. The protection is actually stronger than Deputy Morell alluded to. It actually needs a commencement act. It's not just an order that the Minister can make, it needs a commencement act. The commencement act would, as I was planning to do, would be accompanied by the orders that would explain how the law was going to be brought in. It is possible to bring in very wide exemptions, or it is, and to have consultation around those, and indeed to work in a staged manner. There are many different versions, as Deputy Ward said. There are many ways in which this could be useful in the future. It is a hasty and unnecessary act to remove a piece of legislation over which the Assembly retains complete control in the future. So, in summary, I would say, I believe we should keep the legislative option open. That is all we are voting on today. We're not voting on any of the proposals, any of the policy, the draft orders, anything of that kind. The proposition is merely about keeping the option open. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Hung.
Thank you, sir. I love trees. We all do. We realise the importance of them in producing oxygen for us to breathe, our very existence. As beauty in our landscape, a home and shelter for birds, invertebrates, red squirrels, bats. Shade against the searing summer sun, nuts and fruits, wood for furniture, creativity, and to keep us warm. So much more. I appreciate that as a result of a few rogue developers and reports that they felled trees on development sites, the last Assembly sought to protect trees with from their chainsaws. However, to class all work on trees under development in the planning law to protect them was sadly proving counterproductive, and up until November the 1st/2nd, when Storm Ciarán hit Jersey, we were sadly all receiving news that suspect trees were being cut down before any new proposed legislation came into force. There was, as the Constable of Grouville mentioned, a general disinclination to plant any more trees for fear that they might become subject to a planning decision. Islanders do not want to have to send a photo of a tree using a smartphone to the planning department to ask a member of staff for permission to cut off a branch, wait 28 days for a decision as to whether they can go ahead, or else be required to pay for a full planning application. Tree surgeons were up in arms, farmers and landlords were incensed. The proposals are an example of bureaucracy gone mad, of too much power for the Minister for the Environment, more red tape, an affront on our personal liberties, liberties our predecessors fought so hard for. The proposed legislation suggested by the Minister flew in the face of trusting islanders to do the right thing, letting them protect the trees they love, just as they have done for generations. And this is especially true now, when trees have fallen during Storm Ciarán. Sir, I ideally want us all to support the Lieutenant Governor and Trees for Life in planting trees to replace the thousands that have been lost during the storm. A fund has been set up, and the purpose of this new initiative is to raise money to cover the cost of replanting trees and hedgerows destroyed by Storm Ciarán across the island. I want to encourage my grandchildren and friends to join this initiative and to plant sweet chestnuts, acorns to grow into oak trees, beech, apples in built-up areas, in parishes including St Helier, school playgrounds, gardens and fields around the island and along roadsides. But I want them to be able to do this without the fear that in a few years' time they will have to file a planning application if they find that their tree has grown a bit too tall or is in the wrong place. I do not want them to worry about planting for fear that their tree might become subject to a plan application with a possible financial penalty in the future. Sir, I urge members to apply common sense. By all means, put proper tree protection orders on more specific trees and more trees on the island, but please reject the idea that all trees should fall under the bureaucracy of the government's planning department. Please vote in favour of Deputy Ballish's amendment. Let us rescind any notion that work on trees should be classed as development. We should not keep this law in our back pocket, sir. If we find that people are taking down a lot of trees, we can always bring it back into law in the future, but we do not need to keep this in our back pockets. Let us acknowledge the importance of trees in our landscape. Let us join the Lieutenant Governor, Trees for Life, Jersey Heritage, the National Trust, Grow, the Pollinator Project, and landowners, farmers, tree surgeons, arboriculturists, utility companies, banks and charities. Let this be our mantra. Let us all plant trees, tend and nurture them and protect them as best we can, so that we look after Jersey for today and for future generations, and we leave Jersey better than we found it. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And first, I'd like to congratulate this Assembly for not going down the route of barking up the wrong tree, feeling stumped, or turning over a new leaf in any of their speeches so far. Sorry.
I do feel there should be a standing order about that.
I would agree with you, sir.
Yes.
Sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought. But I stand to speak because there's certain elements of this debate which has been very interesting to hear. I mean, hearing Deputy Morell and Deputy Ward agree over this Assembly is very interesting, and the fact that I agree with them both is also interesting. The travesty which was the Sycamore Gap tree being cut down shows that there are insensitive and people who just don't understand the value of trees in any sense, be it through just their beauty of where they're positioned, through the power of what they do for our environment. But they are very, very important to us in many, many ways and many, many aspects. But I feel a lot of that has been missed over them. What this proposition actually seeks to do is that to remove the power to find better ways and better methods of controlling where trees are protected, not protected, cut down. And also the tact actually being used that, as the ministers, well, soon to be former minister said, that this still has to come to the Assembly for approval. That's why P71 was in existence. The fact that that power that he has to bring this option, this proposition to the Assembly, still has to be ratified by this Assembly. And I was going to say for the minister that one of the things that was really lacking for me with his proposition as P71 was the lack of briefings given to states members, and actually the clarification that was required as a hearing from some people and members of the public and what have you, that they were getting confused by the difference between diameter and circumference, as many people were saying that this 21 centimetre diameter was only this big. Well, actually, that would be circumference, because 21 centimetre diameter is probably actually closer to, to use old money, 31 inch in circumference. It's a vastly bigger tree than what people are actually anticipating. especially when then you're also talking about being 1.5 meters off the ground. So if it was providing confusion, which has then led to this overarching effort, I'm sorry about this, but to chop down this power away from the minister, where actually we do need protections. And actually hearing the ministers talking about the methods of using trees to help slow the water flow into Grand Vaux, maybe actually needs more of a protection area where trees shouldn't be chopped down, or they should receive better protection. Because he's right, the idea of going around and listing individual trees. I mean, on the planning committee, we went to one site in St Brellards where there was a magnificent tree in the garden, but it had no protection. It was an old, and it was still able to be trimmed down and taken away for development rights. Where actually the owners were never going to put it forward to be listed. Is it the right of the public to put forward the right for a tree to be listed? I don't know. Does the public know? And it sounds like it's a very long-winded process and not very workable, manageable in a modern age. So I think this act to completely remove the minister's power, or the future minister's power, to bring this with no other method to accompany it is very short-sighted. And I feel that if we remove this power now, nothing will come. And we will see, as Deputy Howell has mentioned, where people are already chopping down trees, the more trees will be lost, and actually we'll lose a lot of very good shade, a lot of good protection for soil. I mean, there are so many consequences to what happens where we lose trees and biodiversity. One of the things, as we're receiving hotter days, I mean, every summer now we're having a day which is going over 30 degrees in the middle of summer. My favourite place to go is St Catherine's Woods at that point, because if it's 36 outside of the woods, it's only 26 inside the woods. We have this plague of plastic grass which is coming, which, I mean, if you've ever been to Springfield when they're playing one of the football matches there, the heat that you feel coming off the 3G AstroTurf is actually unbearable just to stand there and watch, let alone for the people running around and actually playing. And this all increases our ambient temperature within our environment. You have to go different places to try and avoid this, where trees in the right places, protected and made sure that we are providing shade, really, really does help to reduce our ambient temperatures, and actually provides us the ability to feel more comfortable without having to turn on air conditioning, which then adds to more energy use and then can potentially cause more problems, because, let's face it, still a lot of energy is produced through fossil fuels around the world. So I will leave it there. I don't believe this proposition to remove this power from the planning minister is the right way to do it, not without anything else being brought in as an alternative. Thank you.
Right, Deputy Conatable St Peter.
Thank you, sir. Unsurprisingly, I will be supporting Deputy Balash and voting for this proposition. And I touched on this yesterday because certainly speaking with parishioners and also having attended various meetings, it was absolutely clear that large landowners and farmers were pretty much insulted by the first iteration of the Environment Minister's law, which followed on from Article 8. Exactly why we'd want to keep something in our back pocket. Why do you want to keep something in your back pocket just in case you want to use it on some occasion to introduce yet another draconian measure? As a project manager, we were taught that you had to take people on a journey. If you wanted a successful implementation, you needed to take them on a journey, and that's exactly what you need to do. Dictating to people what they can or cannot do with trees that they have planted isn't really acceptable. What is the evidence that people are not looking after our hedgerows, not planting trees? I certainly heard, as the Constable Greville has already noted, I actually heard someone who had planted several tens of thousands of trees over the last few years, saying that as a result of what the Minister had suggested, he would not be planting any further trees, because why should he plant trees if he then, at some point, could no longer manage them in the way that he wished to? You cannot introduce this sort of thing. I do not like blanket legislation, which then uses carve-outs to say, oh, well, yes, but you can do this because we'll have an exception for that, we'll have an exception for that. It's a bit like saying, well, we won't allow parking on any road, but we'll introduce the exceptions to where you can park. I mean, that would be ludicrous, but it is a similar thought. I have very little else to say other than the regulations that followed on from this have been extremely unpopular. And I'm pleased that the Minister has now said that he would actually abandon these if he continued to be Minister. But I think we have to start from scratch. I think we all agree, those of us who were responsible for voting for this in the first place, that we rushed into things at the time. There were incidents. We were actually reassured by the then Environment Minister there would be substantial carve-outs and we didn't need to worry. Well, actually, as we now know, that didn't happen. The regulations that followed on were draconian. They haven't been accepted by the island and they're extremely unpopular. So I would ask you to support Deputy Balash. Thank you very much.
Very much. Deputy Alex Pearce.
Thank you, sir, and I don't intend to spend long on this because I think some good points have been made. I thought I'd rise because Deputy Balash and I enjoyed talking to the Year 5 class of St Clement's Primary School late last year. I think it was after Storm Ciarán. And we discussed many topics with the students who were about to come in the next week into this assembly. And the conversation was pretty orderly. We moved between topics until somehow the topic of trees came up. And would you believe it was impossible to move this class off the topic of trees. Their interest was piqued, they were excited, and the teacher had to try their very best to say, is this next question about trees, to which all the hands went down, and we slowly moved on to topics such as the mace. What did come out of that was the exact discussions about liberties, freedom, and the rights of the community, and the concern at the ability to lose large areas of woodland that are in private ownership really did concern people. The concern about canopy cover in areas concerned those students. But really, I want to ask the same question the Connétable of St Brelard is asking the proposer, which is, if not this, then what? What fills the void? I think we've heard from many places that the tree protection order approach isn't going to be fit for purpose. We need something. And I have no concern saying that I have my challenges with a definition in law that requires exemption for trees. But I wasn't party to the conversations that landed on why that was a choice. I think maybe there's a solution with regulations by which you define what does require development, not what doesn't. But as I say, I'm not familiar with why we landed on a definition that requires exemptions. So I want to hear, in summing up from Deputy Balash, how he thinks we can provide the relevant safeguards for the trees that are on the island, whilst maintaining an enthusiasm within the community to plant new trees and grow new trees with the least bureaucracy. Because right now I haven't seen that approach forthcoming. And we've heard arguments of, I dare say, fear that we are getting what Deputy Reniff has proposed in the past, but we've heard that's not what's forthcoming either and wouldn't be of his choice. So that probably isn't the right place to lay one's fears. I do see why one keeps something in their back pocket. If we do pursue an alternative legal instrument, potentially another amendment to the planning and building law, but we find actually there is a very good legal reason why we had to use a definition of trees with exemption rather than a definition of trees with inclusion, we just have to go through the same legwork again. And I would prefer to see something that included regulations and not orders. But until this Assembly votes on a Commencement Day Act of Amendment number 8, I don't see anything that scares me I would like to think that I would stand up with the courage to take a vote the right way on whatever is proposed, and without sufficient information, detail, and protections for tree owners, I wouldn't want to support commencement on such a piece of language that defines any activity on a tree as development, except for otherwise. But I think until we see those options and until we hear from the proposer as to how he intends to deliver on greater protection for trees, I think we can keep this in our pocket and wait for another day and not act with haste.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I thought I'd break my silence after yesterday. I found it very cathartic, but after a while I did feel like a Trappist monk who was on a Buddhist meditation retreat, and I hope it had some cathartic effect on me. The good thing about having a WhatsApp group is that you can get all of your puns, which in this case might be tree-related, out in the WhatsApp group, so I don't need to do what Deputy Coles did and bore you with any of those, sir. I do want to share a few thoughts which may not necessarily come down on one side or the other, but I think need to be put on the record. Because clearly this whole tree law is something that has struck a chord with many members of the population, and perhaps unusually, but we know that planning tends to be something that does engage people in our island, and that's good to see when there are other areas of apathy towards politics. And it's certainly frustrating sometimes as a constituency deputy when we get emails or phone calls after the fact and are asking questions, why have these trees been cut down, or why are these branches being cut down? And sometimes there are good reasons for that, other times it seems to be fairly arbitrary. And so when Deputy Morell gave the example of this mature fig tree which had just been cut down, what I note there is that it wasn't a deficiency in the law that we have. This tree already had a protection order on it. But for some reason, that protection order wasn't sufficient to have the tree, to stop it from getting cut down. Moreover, we're told that there were plans that were submitted in an application which simply didn't put the tree on those plans. And my question would be, well then what happened to the person or the organisation that submitted those plans? Because that should be a de facto offence, I would have thought. If you have submitted a planning application and you've omitted to put something on which has a material consequence, especially when there's a protection order on it, it seems to me that it could either be an accidental act of omission, but it could also be a fraudulent act where you haven't alerted the planning applications panel or the minister to that on the application. And there should be consequences for that. And so that leads me to think, well, do we therefore need a new law to come into place, or do we simply need to apply the laws that we already have? And it's not exactly the same area, but we already know that when we look at buildings, and I know that both buildings and trees, certainly in the urban area, do have a great impact on the visual and aesthetic aspects. And when we see historic buildings which also have planning orders on them, i.e. listed buildings, but there's no compulsion to maintain those buildings, we can draw a parallel with perhaps what happens with trees. And actually there is power in the planning law which says if a building is falling into dilapidation, the chief officer, not the minister, is delegated responsibility to contact the owner and say, please, will you do your building up? And ask them nicely initially and then compel them to do that. And we know that we've been told by the assistant minister, the outgoing assistant minister, that they don't like to use those powers because they're too draconian. But of course, that's never been tested. That's just an opinion. It would be nice if actually they did that. And I'd suggest that the same could be applied when it comes to trees. I also do have some sympathy with the comments of the Constable of St. Peter. And I think we ignore at our peril the many emails and phone calls and social media interactions that there have been. And it seems to, of course, largely be from residents of the countryside, but I don't think exclusively, who no doubt feel very strongly about the areas that they live in. I mean, if you live in the countryside, it may well be that you've chosen to live there and that you do that because you value the bucolic nature of where you live. Other people choose to live in urban areas partly out of convenience, but often there's no choice when it comes to housing and where you end up living. So to simply say that all those who have been contacting and lobbying don't care for trees, I think is, first of all, cannot be correct. And it's also dangerous and probably insulting to those who have got in contact with us. And I think of a scenario whereby what is it that we're actually trying to legislate for, and are there potentially unintended consequences? So imagine you have a garden. So I'd ask a simple question. What is better, a garden which has 5 trees in it, where somebody decides they need to or want to cut down one of those trees for whatever reason, or a garden which doesn't have any trees and never had any trees in it and will never have any trees in it? Because in that last scenario, the person who perhaps doesn't care for trees at all, and they haven't put any trees in their garden because they prefer to have concrete, or they prefer to have AstroTurf in their garden, and that's fine, they can do that if they want to. There are practical reasons why you might like that. They don't have to worry about this law. They don't have to apply for permission to cut down a tree because they don't have any trees. But you can imagine somebody saying, well, actually, the reason I've got 5 trees in my garden and I'm 70 now is because I planted those trees when I was 20. And actually, it just happens that one of those trees I no longer need, or it's getting ill. And if they feel that they have to go through a long-winded process to remove one of those trees, you can understand that they might not like the label to say, but why are you cutting down trees? We need trees. Trees are valuable. Trees have birds in them, and they're good for the environment. And they say, I know, that's why I have planted 5 trees in the first place. So I think we both need to be very careful about the message that we're sending out with and the way we engage with the public on this. And also actually what the intention of the law is, because the law is only as good as the enforcement that comes with the law. And in my time, I think I've seen both probably overzealous enforcement of laws, but often in the Jersey context, we talk about light touch regulations, and we say, but we often have this contradiction where ministers want to have really powerful, often overreaching laws, but then which are simply unenforced because they would never be accepted by the public, or there isn't the administration. And we know also, I think it has to be said, that the Environment Department is historically and currently chronically understaffed. So I simply put those thoughts on the record. I think it's important that they were said, but I will listen to the rest of the debate, and we'll see where we go from there, sir.
Very much, Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So I recall us reading about a speech that a deputy of Greville made to this assembly. I think it was around in 1974, when there was a law before the States called the Regulations of Undertakings Law. Regulations of Undertakings Law. A law that gave this assembly the potential power to regulate all sorts of activity. The detail wasn't set out, but that would come later in orders and regulation. It was a law to control the carrying out of undertakings and to regulate further development of Jersey. The power to regulate. It was said that the law would be fine because the states would then be consulted later on the detail of it. That law was passed, and it was kept in the pocket of the states. It was used to protect Jersey. The arguments were advanced to protect Jersey. It was to protect how much building work could happen, how many people could be employed, who could work. That law was used to regulate. It was put on and it was put off by orders and regulations many times. I joined the States and I was part of a committee that was using powers granted by a previous assembly before 1999 to decide on who could be employed, which capital project could be done, which building developments could be undertaken. This tree law was advanced because of a concern of a developer that had cut down some trees prior to putting a planning application forward. The regulations of undertaking also could have been used to stop that. It was often used for capital projects in land that had been reclaimed from the sea. Jersey has for centuries reclaimed land, that land had to be then used. The Dean is here, outside his parish church of St Helier, is an old sea wall. Land created after that sea wall was where the Pomme d'Or is today, and the old abattoir, now the bus station. All our harbours, commercial buildings, our island and St Helier has expanded over the centuries, and it has been subject on and off of regulation. That Regulations of Undertakings Law was repealed, and it was replaced by an omnibus law, which has less powers and much, I would argue, better powers in the work and housing law. It was also repealed because there was a power in the competition law that allowed abuse of dominant position. A dominant operator of a land banking landowner that wants to put a planning application in might knock down some trees, which I think was true. A big developer sawn down a load of trees before a planning application was put forward to consider whether or not building could be made. The deputy in his opening remarks spoke of Longueville. I'm familiar from Longueville. It's part of it's part of where I live. It's part of St Saviour. It's where I represent. It's where I was born. It's where my father and grandfather and great-grandfather have planted many trees, many which have been unfortunately destroyed in the recent storm Chiron. So this debate is about a power of this assembly to have something in one's back pocket that could be used. Professor Sir John Vickers reviewed the way the competition law, analogous to the Regulations of Undertaking Law, analogous to the planning law, of how that could be used. And he said in small places, it's important that policy and regulation has particular challenges. It says conducting competition and regulatory policy is hard, but it can have economic benefits. There can be benefits in this law. It can. But Professor Sir John Vickers said there were two themes that were worth stressing. The first is an importance of principled pragmatism. All competition authorities have a duty to make use of scarce resources which are trees, maybe. In small jurisdictions, it's especially important and challenging, and if prioritisation is key and should take account of what happens in a local environment. So laws can be well-intentioned. I've got no doubt, and I've been looking back to see, I wasn't part of the States Assembly when the original planning appeal law number 8 was brought in. But I note that, as is a requirement of all Jersey law, there is a human rights statement stated in it. And Deputy Balash quite rightly spoke about freedoms, about how laws can curtail freedoms. And we are subject to the ECHR, the European Convention of Human Rights. And two rights were cited in the citation that was based, it's not legal advice, but the law officers write us, give members indications of whether the law could curtail those rights, and they give advance notice of that. And interestingly, the law that was brought before the States addresses two rights that could be curtailed. I've not seen many laws that set out such detail of those rights. Right to peaceful occupation of possessions was one, and there is numerous paragraphs around it, about it, and also rights to a fair trial. And how the Planning Law 2002 could be then amended and could be then be potentially fall foul, potentially, of the fundamental human rights. And those fundamental human rights are important and must be guarded and must be protected. They are universal, and if they are not regarded and if they're not protected, then they basically mean that we are less free. Deputy Balash said that we are an over-regulated island. And I must say that I think that there is a consensus amongst members that we are. But how do we get that regulation? We get that from laws, and then we're told it's okay, it'll be okay later on. And if you do not have the openness and transparency of the way that the law is enacted, and the Minister has said there's an Appointed Day Act, and only by the Appointed Day Act will the orders be made. We have three types of legislation. I'm not giving the States members a lesson, they know that, but it's really important. There is a primary law passed by this Assembly subject to Privy Council approval, regulations only passed by the States, then it's law, and then there are orders, which is a ministerial order, which is signed by a minister. It's a piece of legislation that is only put on the order paper, and they're rarely called in, but it's an order-making power, but it is subordinate legislation. And I think what Deputy Balash is saying is that the order-making power is the thing that was potentially faulty. It was potentially faulty because, and the Minister has said himself that it was faulty because it was an overreach of what was intended. But the fundamental thing is that because trees fell within the development rights, meant that the order was lawful. The order was lawful, but it went to a great extent further than the intention of the states. And that's the issue. Is this power that the states has with the law remaining acceptable? Is it proportionate? Is it right? And is the law right in terms of its protections not to be abused in the minds of some people by an overzealous environment planning minister who would bring forward an order which may or may not be noticed? And everybody would say that I think that the order was overzealous. In Storm Ciaran, some members of the public said, did Storm Ciaran require planning approval to rip down those beautiful trees in Longville, which was subject to not just the hurricane but the tornado? And Deputy Balash is right, it ripped through Rue des Prés and it cut down trees that were over 150 years old, and it scourged them. And we're trying to build them, we're trying to plant them back. Some of them, I declare, are owned by my sisters and myself and my late uncle. Trees that had been planted for years. They might not have been known about. There was no intention to take them down. They were planted, they were there, but they were very, very old trees. Now, does the planning department have the resources to go round with a notebook and note every single listed tree? There are issues about listed buildings. There are many, many buildings in Jersey which are subject to rules that mean you can't do anything. A listed building means that you have your rights curtailed. There is a planning application, which I'm aware of in Trinity, which is now required because of a regulation passed because of this Bridging Island plan and another amendment that requires now a planning application to have a thermal report carried out. That thermal report costs £300. This planning application is for a veranda, so it's not the house, but because it's covered, because it's listed, and a thermal thing needs to be done for the portico. That costs £300, and I found out that actually it's the planning department that's paying for the £300. Is a thermal report required for a porch going into a house that you can't change because you can't put glazed windows on it? It's nonsense. It's a disproportionate, it's not pragmatic, it's not proportionate, it seems to be overzealous. That's because a listing involved. Deputy Balash is quite unique in this Assembly in bringing forward a piece of legislation as a backbencher and repealing it. He knows how to write it, and he's had advice from, but he's just repealing a part of a law. And I think that the law is faulty because it gives too much power, potential power. And I think the best situation, because there's been such a kerfuffle about this, and there's clearly a more pragmatic and proportionate and limited way of dealing with this, would be for the legislation to be repealed and for it to come back with the right of proportionate powers that do not deprive people's rights, and give this assembly the right, and I say no underhand tactics here, I'm not saying anything's done wrong, but there clearly is a prioritisation, is that when we've now, after Storm Ciarán and the tornado and the flooding, do we want to do that and spend lots of resources on building a massive database on trees, creating a requirement to have a planning permission for, I mean, if what the minister would have carried out but is reversed would have happened, it would have been a really controlled society where we would have had massive controls over every single tree. That's the risk. If you give power, power can be used rightly, pragmatically and properly, but it can also be used wrongly. And in this example, we've got a law that was passed in good faith for one reason, but then it was used to a blanket possibility. Democracy worked, members made their views clear, and then it was stopped. But the underlying principle is the law gives the minister by order the power to do the same thing again. And I wonder whether that's right. And I would welcome Deputy Balazs's summing up of whether or not he thinks, because many members that have been in this assembly a long time understand, and all members now understand, how laws are passed and how regulation can, and how the regulatory rights can actually be given. And I'm not a great regulator. I don't like a regulated island. I like freedom to enjoy property, freedoms, and there should be a very, very good reason to regulate. A very good reason to regulate, and that regulation probably should be regulation, not by order, because a regulation means it comes to a debate in this assembly, not by order of the minister. So I think the legislation, much of the Bridging Island plan was faulty in its thinking, in my view. Some decisions were made on erroneous information. We have a housing crisis, we need to get on building, because that's the right to homes, and we have the right to protect the environment too. So we've got a lot of prioritisation to do. I suspect the right decision is to repeal this law and for it to come back with a proportionate and right approach, which is probably not an order-making power, but a regulatory power. And I would listen to the summing up very carefully for the move of the proposition and observations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Conor St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I do wonder if we're making rather over much of this. The number eight amendment was brought in to address a particular situation which still persists. We don't want rogue developers knocking down trees without any form of prior planning application. That was passed by, not quite unanimously, but almost, by the members at the time with good reason. It has since sat there, and we have waited the regulations to expand on what it was intended to do. The first attempt, maybe second attempt, was greeted, if that's the right expression, with some disdain by the public at large, and again, rightly so, and again, to his credit, the Minister has accepted that and has gone away and said he would not bring those regulations forward in their present form. So we are in a situation where, as has been said before, and I'm very much in the camp of the Constable Brelod and Deputy Curtis on this, we are in the camp of remaining in control. There's no appointed day out, and it may not be a bad thing to have it in our back pocket. The problem, as Deputy has just said, is there a better way of dealing with this? I think it could well be that the way forward is to appeal Amendment number 8, but simultaneously bring in a new law which sets out in the legal framework more particularly and more accurately what the powers are to be, and that hopefully will allay some of the concerns that the public at large have. But we're not there yet, and for the moment I am not sure what this repeal in itself will achieve. As I say, so we are in control at the moment as an assembly, and the matter we do need to address is, if we are to repeal this law, how are we going to protect trees which are or could be the subject of the same sort of treatment that road developers have shown in the past, and that is the nub of the problem. And again, like others, I invite Deputy Balash to offer any solution he might have to that problem. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principle? Deputy Tom Binney.
I hope yesterday's events won't result in my speaking doing more harm and good to this proposition. And I have to say, sir, to my shame, I haven't prepared a speech given the events of the last fortnight. So this could be very ramshackle, but I'm going to try and attempt to make a point if I can. Everybody's spoken this morning very romantically about wildlife corridors and young people being concerned about trees, but I just cannot believe how out of touch this assembly is and how much arrogance has been displayed, because there seems to be absolutely no understanding, sir, of how the trees that we're all keen to preserve have got there. And I started planting trees in good numbers, actually, in 1975, because at about that time, people may or may not remember, we had Dutch elm disease, and the island was absolutely ravaged. People like myself and hundreds of others paid a lot of money to get bulk excavators in to dig out hedges, clean the roots, buy trees, replant them, water them, look after them, and bring them to fruition. So we didn't need Broad Street, and we didn't need this assembly in order to achieve that. In 1987, we had a storm, and that took out between 20 and 25,000 trees. Nobody filled in a form, sir, to take those down. They just came down. And once again, the countryside was ravaged. And once again, good people in the countryside put their hands in their pockets, spent their money, and restored the countryside. This lovely countryside that we've got to preserve for everybody. And it's interesting, because I know for myself, an awful lot of the stuff, the money that I'd invested to put fine trees up, I lost a lot of trees in 1987, as did a good number of other people. We're facing the same situation now. And I'll make the point again, 20 to 25,000 trees have been torn out. Where did those trees come from? They were people's private property, people that love the countryside and that had spent their time and their money nurturing them, okay? Right, up to this point in time, nobody has required any laws for that to happen. And I just think at the moment, I'll tell you a little story. I was contacted when the laws first came out by some people in the countryside. They said, will you convene a meeting? And I convened a meeting. I expected a dozen people. 70 people turned up, landowners, dairy farmers, woodland owners and so on, tree surgeons, and I've never seen such outrage in the whole of my life. These people said, we do not need this and we do not want this. We don't want to be interfered with. And it's actually a relatively small number of people now that are looking after all this. And I would say, please, before we do anything, when we come to press our buttons today, consider these people, because they are the people that are going to put right the countryside that's just been torn apart. The amount of trees that were taken down in the storm, 20 to 25,000, compare that to the small number that people have taken out because people are focused on them. We've had consultation. When I spoke to the 70 people, I don't think one of the 70 people had filled in the consultation form. They're busy, they're out there doing stuff, they're looking after the countryside. So lots of people that look out their window concerned about the countryside fill in these consultations, and we act on that, and we look at the people that are doing the job for us, and we ignore them. So when I say we're out of touch, sir, we are chronically out of touch, and I believe that we're behaving extremely arrogantly. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'll ask people to take that into consideration when they come to consider the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the principles. Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Balash to respond.
So I'm grateful for all members who have spoken in this debate, and I think it's been quite a good debate, probably a better debate than took place in 2021, when Amendment number 8 was actually adopted. But one of the things that struck me about the debate in 2021 was what members were told by the Minister at the time. And Deputy Young said, this is not about protecting every tree. Choices are going to be necessary. The way the law works is you put the power in the law, and then you pass subordinate legislation to be able to say what can be done without having to make application. And I would say 99% would be dealt with in that way. It would be madness to do anything else. I mean, there are all sorts of options of what we can do about trees. The last thing I have got in my head is applications. Deputy Young at the time had rather a different sense of how this law would work to what I think the current minister has had. And I don't want to criticise the current minister because he conceded that he got it wrong. The first iteration that was put forward of controlling all trees except those that were under 8 centimetres in diameter was obviously absurd. The next iteration of controlling all trees except those with a diameter of less than 25 centimetres, I think was only marginally better. The problem with Amendment number 8 is that it gives a minister too much power, and a number of members have made that point. It's true that the law requires an appointed day act to bring it into force. But once the law is in force, the minister has a completely unfettered discretion to make orders which affect what country people can do with their trees and with their properties. And I appreciate that orders can be challenged after the event, but it seems to me that the law gives the minister too much power. When taking away freedoms, freedoms should be taken away by the states, because the states has the opportunity of balancing the needs of the community with the needs of the individual. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point relates to the fig tree, about which Deputy Morell and Deputy Scott, I think, spoke. I'm not familiar with the detail of the fig tree, but as I understand it, it was a listed tree, but a developer took no notice of the listing and cut it down, and nobody did anything about it. Well, if that is the case, sir, it was a gross failure of administration. It may be that the developer did not mark the listed tree on the planning application which was put in. He should have done. But if he didn't, the department should have known that in this particular property there was a listed tree, and the developer should have been asked to amend his drawing and put the tree on, or in any event the department should have taken into account the fact that somebody had taken the trouble to list the fig tree. And who is accountable for that? Well, not the current minister, I'm glad to say, but his predecessor certainly was responsible, because the minister is accountable for the deficiencies in his department. A number of members asked me what I would do to improve things. And it's a good question and a fair question. And I must say that when the first draft of this legislation was prepared by the law drafter, I did have included a suggestion as to how the listing procedure might be improved. I took it out because I wanted to simplify the law, and because I think at that stage the Minister was talking about further consultation, and I thought that the suggestion could better be brought up in the context of that kind of consultation. But what the law currently does is to provide for a list of protected trees. There is no reason why the law should not be amended, if members thought it was the right thing to do, to say that every oak tree with a diameter of more than a metre, or more than a metre and a half, was ipso facto protected and subject to the protections set out in the law. Different diameters might apply to different species of trees because they grow at different rates. And it's a discussion that I had with the Chief Executive of the Trees for Life organisation. As I say, I think it's a matter which could be brought in. It's a matter which would need careful consideration, particularly because the diameter of any particular tree which was going to be automatically protected would be subject, obviously, for debate, and different people would have different ideas about what should be done. My own preference is rather on the lines of the Constable of St Brelard. I think that when a tree has been around for 100 years or more, then it probably deserves to be looked after and protected. But I don't think we want to bring in a blanket control which protects all trees and imposes a bureaucratic burden. The body, indeed, which Deputy Scott's proposition envisages setting up, is the very kind of organisation which might be consulted on a change in the law of this kind. So the third point I want to make, and it relates to arguments that a number of members have made, which is we should not take away protections that we already have. But of course the position is that we have no protection at the moment because the law is not in force. It needs an appointed day act to bring it into force. The Minister, and I think that the well, I've made that point. The law is not in force. I think it's more important to. I'm sorry. A number of members spoke. Deputy Doublé spoke, and Deputy Morrell, I think, spoke of setting an example for the young. But it seems to me that it's more important to give a message to young people that we want to protect the environment, we want to protect trees, but we want to do it in a sensible way. With amendment number 8, sir, as I said in my opening speech, we are starting in the wrong place. The Minister thought it would be a good idea to have this law in the back pocket, but that seems to me to be the argument of the bureaucrat and doesn't pay sufficient regard to the need to protect the freedoms of the individual, which ought to be important to every member of this assembly. We should not control all trees. We should control trees, and protect trees which are important by reason of age, size, position, or whatever may be. We need a fresh approach. This law doesn't allow us to make that fresh approach because it starts from the premise that every single tree is protected and is liable to planning controls unless it is exempted by ministerial order. I think, sir, and this probably was the point essentially being made by Deputy Binet, we should trust people. We should trust those people who are in fact planting trees and looking after trees to do the right thing. Occasionally there will be mistakes. Occasionally there will be a sycamore gap, but you can never avoid tragedies of that kind because people will do wildly bad things if given the opportunity. And I think, sir, that, as I say, this law takes us nowhere, and I hope that members will support its repeal. I move the principles.
Do you call for the appel? That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles of P90. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 27 votes pour, 21 votes contre, no abstentions.
Can we have the 27, please, sir?
27 indeed.
All the numbers. Sorry.
Yes, we'll call all the names, thank you.
Those members voting for the Connetable, St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, St Juan and St Mary, Deputies Labby, Luce, Lehegara, Ayer, Gorst, Farnham, Osoph, Balash, War, Scott, Powell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Barbara Ward, Andrews, and the Connetable of St Saviour and Grouville and Deputy Rose Binet. Those members voting contre, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Morel, Rob Ward, Alves, Gardner, Moore, Mesick, Coles, Porre, Miles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Jearn, Miller, Kovac, Alex Curtis, Wilson and Stevenson.
Sorry, you have your letter. Griffey. Does the scrutiny panel wish to call the matter in?
No, thank you, sir.
Very much. Do you move in second reading?
I move the articles of the bill in second reading.
Are they seconded for second reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in second reading? If no member wishes to speak in second reading, then I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting in second reading kindly show. The appel is called for. I ask members to return to their seats and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. The vote is on second reading of P90. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in second reading. 27 votes pour, 18 votes contre, no abstentions. Do you move in third reading?
Bill in third reading.
Is it seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputies.
So very briefly, we're just doing an example of how we pass legislation so quickly through this Assembly in 3 readings in succession. Other parliaments don't do that. They put it back for, and I just urge whoever is responsible for the, this shouldn't be the message. I don't want to send the message out that we don't care about trees, that we don't want something. A replacement, I hope, can come very quickly for them, something that's proportionate and right, and that the Assembly will command the Assembly's approval.
Deputy Talia?
I think that's a reasonable observation, although it only seems to get raised when one doesn't like the particular law that's being put through. It's no doubt an underlying quirk of our Assembly, which ministers will, on the one hand, say is valuable because it means we can be very expedient and get legislation passed quickly in Jersey. Just to comment, first of all, it could have been called in by scrutiny, so there is a check and balance in that process. And the scrutiny panel, I'm not sure who they are, I think it's Deputy Luce and Deputy Jackson, Constable Jackson, but no doubt who already supported the proposition strongly. So I guess they're not going to scrutinise it if that's the case. It does also show that, of course, that backbenchers can move legislation, albeit this is fairly minor in the terms of the administration that's required for it. And we do have an unusual position here where we don't have a government that has confidence, we don't have a government that we have confidence anymore, but we are able to pass legislation through a private member, which I think is probably something we need to retain in our system, which is valuable. So I have no problem adhering to the will of the Assembly, even though I didn't support this particular proposition.
Deputy Scott?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say that I agree with Deputy Tadier, that to the extent that you did have separate readings, I don't think it's appropriate and useful when you have something so simple as this particular type of amendment. It's very straightforward. It doesn't really need much in the way of scrutiny. I scrutinised it, and it took me about 10 minutes. And so, if that were ever considered, the proposal that Deputy Osif mentioned, I would hope that would be taken into account. Thank you.
Grant Arbison, Brillard?
Thank you, sir. And in supporting the proposition, sir, I too will come back to the Assembly, I'm sure others will be, to ensure this. There is a tree protection order process in place which is easily dealt with by the general public and acceptable to the general public, which this proposal clearly wasn't. So we can't let it stand here, there's no question about that. And I, for one, whether it'll be through scrutiny or as a backbencher, will certainly take that forward. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I want to speak because I want to on record my concerns that what has just been happened is we've removed a protection with nothing in place that's effective or seen to be ineffective, and there will be a significant delay before anything comes back. And we now have what some people in this assembly might call a gap in the market, and so there will be unfettered access to make changes to things that are to trees that are protected, and it is carte blanche for developers and those, particularly the wealthiest who buy large properties on the edge of the island and want their views to cut down trees with absolutely no comeback. And I think we've made a huge error in this assembly today by doing this and not having anything in place. This has been rushed, and perhaps the solution is to take the third reading or the second reading later on, but we haven't done that today, but we made a significant change to a law, and it is significant. And I think I'm slightly disappointed it wasn't scrutinised to see the impact of this removal and to track and see what actually will happen with this, because there will be an impact of this wholly libertarian approach, this supposed freedom. And that freedom, sir, is the freedom for developers to do what they want. And we've just allowed that. And I think it's a real mistake today. And I just want to make sure that that's on Hansard for me to come back to at some point. Thank you, sir.
It is, of course, open to members to make a proposition that a matter is called into scrutiny. It's not simply a matter for the scrutiny panel. Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir, thank you. I will just make one point, which is that I do think it is a shame that we have removed this power, and I do think I would ask all members to remember when they do receive letters and representations from members saying, from members of the public, saying, why has this tree been cut down, why has this happened, that the response will have to be, well, we had a potential power to do that, but we chose to remove it from our statute books, and I think that is a shame.
Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? No other member wishes to speak. Deputy Labby?
Yes, just listening to Deputy Robert Ward there, I would disagree. There is something in place, as the Constable of St Brillards has said. We have protection of trees. We can take out orders. In actual fact, in my own parish, when I was first elected, I took protection orders out on the 2 yew trees in the churchyard. And later on, when I realised that developers were moving into Gorey Village, I took out protection orders for the willow trees, and they were preserved, and the estate was actually called after them. So there is something in place. My worry is, by having draconian measures, as was being suggested, people, in anticipation of the laws coming in, are taking down trees, and that's the reality of the situation. But also, if people know that, or are minded that they have got to seek planning permission and go near the planning department to maintain their trees, that they simply won't plant them. And that, to my mind, is the effect of bringing in these kind of measures. So I'd just like to make those points. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? No other member wishes to speak in third reading? I close the debate and invite Deputy Balash to respond.
Sorry, I don't believe that the Assembly is doing anything other than the right thing in removing a law which is not yet in force, which has no practical effect upon anyone except, as the Deputy of Grouville has said, conceivably to encourage people to take down trees before any controls actually are brought in. I remind the Minister that the law delegates to his chief officer the responsibility for the list of protected trees. And while he is still in office, I would urge him to ensure that his officials actually make sure that the system works considerably better than it seems to be working at the present time. I move the bill in third reading, sir.
Is the appel called for? Yes, appel is called for. Right, members to return to their seats. The vote is on the third reading of P90. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in third reading, 29 votes pour, 18 votes contre, no abstentions.
I have the names, please, sir.
Do you want both sides?
Yes, please, sir.
Very well.
Those members voting pour, the Connaught Harbour, St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St John, St Juan and St Mary, and Deputies Labby, Luce, Lehegre, Ayer, Gorst, Farnham, Moore, Osoph, Balash, War, Scott, Al, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Andrews, and the Connaught Harbour of St Saviour and Grouville, and Deputy Rose Binet. And those members voting contre, Deputy Southern, Tadier, Dudley, Rob Ward, Alves, Gardner, Mezek, Coles, Porre, Miles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Beltham, Jearn, Miller, Kovac, Wilson and Stevenson.
Very well. The next item is amendment to Standing Order, Political Awareness and Education Privileges and Procedures Subcommittee, E92, lodged by the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and I ask the greffier to read that proposition.
The States will have to decide whether they are of opinion to make the following amendment to the Standing Orders of the States of Jersey with immediate effect.
Yes.
Sorry, sir. I just wanted to ask if the defo could be raised on Connaught Harbour Troy. I understand he's receiving hospital treatment at this moment in time.
Right. Yes, it's not the defo being raised.
So
I think you wanted to mark defo excuse.
Excuse, yes. Thank
In the light of that information, members accept that that should be defo excuse. Yes, very well. Connaught Harbour Troy is defo excuse. Thank you very much indeed. Wilson. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Alves, who is the chair of the subcommittee, is going to take this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. And I thank the chair of PPC for allowing me to take this proposition forward as the rapporteur. PPC has lodged this proposition which proposes to amend standing orders to include a specific subcommittee under PPC's remit to cover political awareness and education matters. So when I was first elected in 2018, I was shocked that such a subcommittee did not exist. Growing up in and being educated in Jersey, I never had any political education during my school years and even into my adult life. In fact, I think I learned more about politics when I was at university because there was a UK general election and it felt like everyone was talking about it for about a year before. I was fortunate enough to have a parent who did take an interest in local politics because they had learned about politics when they were in education abroad. Otherwise, I probably would not have been engaged at all. And when I reflected on those who come to work and live on this island from outside, I was acutely aware and concerned at the lack of awareness-raising events and information given around the whole process of voting in this island, especially as our system is so unique and different compared to other jurisdictions. So, not everybody is as fortunate as I was to have a parent with political interests and have been raised in a home where discussions on politics took place, which makes the work of this subcommittee even more important. It is within PPC's terms of reference to raise awareness and engage with the public about the work of the Assembly, encouraging the general public's interest in the politics of Jersey, particularly among children and young people, is vital to ensuring that the people of Jersey can take an informed approach and active interest in the democratic process. Therefore, sir, in consultation with PPC and the current greffier, I decided to propose and lead on this subcommittee, which was first established in 2018, and I was fortunate enough to be re-elected and able to reinstate this subcommittee again this term. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all members, past and present, who have contributed and been part of this subcommittee and its work. PPC are confident that the provision of a permanent subcommittee with this remit will ensure that this work is given the importance and focus it deserves, as well as providing long-term oversight and political support to the GREF's digital and public engagement team and safeguarding the continuation of our efforts to increase the public's engagement with the work of the Assembly. Sir, I move the proposition.
Thank you. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, Deputy Tadier.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm happy to support this. I've had a long-standing interest in political education, and I'm reminded that it's obviously one of the jobs of this Assembly and PPC, sir, and I hope you don't mind me saying that in other parliaments, it's also something that falls to the role of the Speaker to engage with the public and engage with education programmes. And I know that we have a different system, and I'm not here to open that debate up at all. And so I will simply say that it's therefore even more important that PPC is the competent and relevant body that should deal with that. I also think that there's a wider societal issue, and what we've seen at the moment is that there's a great deal of interest in politics at the moment. If you turn on the radio in the morning, you'll see that there's actually some half-decent political commentary for once in the island, but for the other 364 days of the year, or perhaps 365 days of this leap year, you can't necessarily guarantee that. And so, of course, when the media are asking, or suggesting that some people may not be interested in politics, you can't always expect them to be interested if we don't have the milieu in which that political thought is encouraged. One thing I would encourage PPC to do is not to simply focus on the work of the States Assembly, which of course it has to do because it is the body of this Assembly, but to go much further back than that and to talk about politics in the abstract, and also to talk about philosophy in the abstract, and to build on the many centuries of political thought that go before us, not just in Europe, but of course perhaps in the wider world, because I'm often both encouraged and discouraged when I look at the state of the current modern society, where people don't have fundamental grasps of basic logical or philosophical concepts, which therefore they can't build on. And it's not simply that the States Assembly is the be-all and end-all. Other models of democracy are available. And I think if we teach young people in particular about the basics of democracy and what lies behind that, they may well come into the States Assembly, and rather than us teaching them about it, they will teach us about democracy. And they'll say, why is it that you do things like this? Another point, I think, is that the whole point of democracy is one of aspiration and about representing the people. And when we have certain restrictions in place that bar certain types of people in our society from ever holding office because of their nationality, that is basically racist. And I know that previous assemblies have struggled with this concept. And one of the reasons I'm sad to see the current Chief Minister go is because at least I knew that in certain areas where her bread was buttered politically, and I think I'm correct in saying that it's not just an outgoing Chief Minister who stood up for the rights of women to access the Assembly, but she's also somebody who supported the rights of non-British nationals to be able to come into this Assembly to represent themselves. And I hope that continues. And I hope that we have a less chauvinist Assembly now, and I certainly hope that PPC will lead in that regard, because how on earth can we engage with, let's say, Portuguese, Romanian, Polish, Kenyan nationals who may be in our school, who may not hold British passports and who may choose or not, for technical reasons, never to have that nationality, but who are nonetheless part of our hard-working community and valuable parts of our community at all levels, if we say to them, you can't stand for election because you're not British, and we are a British an Assembly, and we are increasingly becoming a monolingual and Assembly and a monolingual society. I know that those are wide-ranging issues, sir, but they're clearly within the remit of this debate, I think, and certainly within the remit of the work of PPC. So I do add, I do hope that PPC will take those comments on board. I hope that they will be progressive, that they will look at democracy and politics in the round and not simply limit it to the walls of this relatively modern building, but actually look at the underlying ideas that are really vibrant when it comes to political thought, which we don't have the monopoly on. Thank you.
Deputy Dublé.
Thank you, sir. The Deputy has my wholehearted support with this proposition, and I'm impressed that it's going, well, I hope that it's going to be made permanent. I really hope members will support it, because I think all of the aims of this subcommittee are ones that we should all be agreeing with. And what I wanted to mention actually was that and especially given the current context, there are many different ways to make an impact in this assembly that go beyond just being a member of government or being a member of scrutiny. And actually PPC and I think there's 2 standing subcommittees if this one is approved, and Diversity Forum, of course, is another, which the Deputy is chair and I'm the vice chair. And that kind of innovation and establishing committees and joining committees and adding to the work of different committees, like the CPA as well, I think has evolved significantly and continues to evolve. I want members to be mindful of the fact that government and scrutiny are not the only ways that we can have impact, and I certainly think that the impact of this committee will continue if it is established permanently and go beyond the work and the passion of Deputy Alves, who is absolutely driving this, and I hope she'll continue to do so for as long as possible.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I'm very much in support generally of political education and of ensuring that members of the public understand their rights to vote and the importance of democracy and the workings of the States Assembly. I'm aware of so much work that the GREF does already, particularly at the school level and working with the Youth Assembly and bringing schools into the States Chamber. And I have to confess that I'm not so clear about how much of that is actually directed by the current subcommittee. So I'd be grateful if Deputy Alves perhaps would just add a little bit more in terms of particularly what the current subcommittee has achieved, what work it's actually done, and the impact, because I do think it's important before you say something is permanent that you at least are quite clear what it's doing and what impact it has, particularly because it does take up members' resourcing, and it's always, best to be clear about, whether things are being done more than one way and what is exactly the particular impact that is being done by this subcommittee. I was slightly uncomfortable when Deputy Tadier suggested there should be more of a general political programme, perhaps advanced by this subcommittee, because I don't know, it just means that the messaging has to be so important, whether people might say you're sounding a bit biased this way or that way. So it started making me feel a little uncomfortable about subparagraph A. Unlike the rest of the paragraphs of the proposition. So I would just ask Deputy Alves perhaps to inform me a bit better on those sub-matters before the vote. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. This Assembly has adopted the ECHR conventions, which include also the various rights which members have alluded to. And one of them is the right to educate, I think. It's a fundamental right. And many of the rights that we have are important. Education is the way that you can change the world, Nelson Mandela said, and he was right. When people are determined they can come to everything, they can overcome everything. It's difficult. The most difficult thing is not to change society, but to change yourself. And you change yourself by education. He said education is the most powerful, I think he used the word weapon, but I'm not sure he'd use that word today, the most tool that we can use to change the world. And if PPC is changing our world by education, helping us with this, and percolating that and strengthening that, then that's a good thing. And it's something that we can be proud about, as our external image is one of a democratic island, a fair island, and an island which treats people with respect, with courtesy, and does not discriminate, whether they be men, women, whether their sexual orientation, whether they be whatever, age, whatever, freedom of discrimination. They're fundamental rights, and this is part of them. If there'd been ECRH compliance statement for this, which this isn't because it's a standing order, it would say that it complies with ECHR. And so I would say that from an external relations point of view that I currently have, it's great that we do this because we're better off as a society when we educate. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm really pleased to see the Privileges and Procedures Committee, subcommittee, bringing this forward. I'm a big believer in greater education. And of course, what we have to focus on is turning around what can only be described as abysmal voter turnout records. We really need to engage our community in the work of this assembly, and the feedback that we consistently receive is that people do not feel that their vote exercises any change or that their vote counts. And so there's an awful lot of work to do. But I simply would like to put a question to the proposer of this proposition, sir, and to ask whether they are proposing that the work will expand to cover the remit of our parochial system. So I'm a massive fan of our parish system. It can be democracy in action and a very powerful thing to see. But equally, it is vital that people engage with our parish system. We saw yesterday the strength of the lobby of constables. We heard from the constable St Brillard's how he considers that importance in his role, and absolutely right it is. But equally, we need to educate our population as to how to engage in that part of our political system, sir. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Morell.
Sir, very briefly, whilst I wholeheartedly back this proposal, no question, I do wonder if actually the people who need education are ourselves, sir. And I refer back to the comment I made yesterday about my daughter listening to the States Assembly and saying, oh my goodness, it's so slow and so boring. How do you cope? Were her words. And I think it just speaks volumes. This is a teenage girl, listening to us in action and not appreciating it, certainly. And so I do wonder if this could be a two-way committee, not just educating people in our community, but also educating ourselves as to how better connect with those people in our community.
Any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? I close the debate and call upon Deputy Alves to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to just thank everybody for their contributions. I didn't expect to have so many actually, and thank you for your positive feedback on the work of the subcommittee so far, which actually probably brings me quite nicely to Deputy Scott's comment around what kind of work we have done so far. So in 2018, when I was first elected, we did not have a members resources team, and I'm sure a lot of members remember that. We also didn't have a digital and engagement team. They just simply did not exist. In fact, we only had our current greffier, and she won't mind me saying, who was deputy greffier at the time, basically working on the side of a table, so to speak, to work on these kinds of issues. So it was important to have this subcommittee constituted, because then we were able to secure funding for this and put together things like programs that have now been, educational program that's been approved, that was approved at the time by the Curriculum Council, to get that into schools, which was something that we hadn't had before. Yes, we did have the Year 5 visits, but that was actually quite poorly resourced, because it was other members of the greffier that were having to do that and bring that all together. So now we have a very well resourced primary school visits. We also have, for example, members are now able to get into schools, and schools are actually inviting us into schools, which wasn't really happening before. I think there was that reluctance for that to happen. So those are some of the things that has happened. Deputy Moore also mentioned about including the parochial system. We do have constables on the committee, and in fact I am in the process of arranging to meet with the committee, the Conotab, around some of the recommendations that have been brought forward from members on the subcommittee. I think there is probably still some work to do with regards to maybe getting information out there about things that elections that happen in the parishes, for example, centennials and things like that. I think there is definitely still some work and discussions to do around that. Unfortunately, some of the subcommittee's work last term was stopped in its tracks due to COVID. We couldn't get into schools. We tried to, we would arrange meetings and then people would be short-staffed, as I'm sure people can appreciate. And I think that's also where, going back to kind of the school visits where we're now being invited in to speak to classes, that's where the point that Deputy Morell, I think, brought up about educating ourselves on how to connect with the community as well. That's a connection that we've made, and I think the team that we currently have in place working really hard to make other links with other organisations to enable that facility to continue. I think Deputy Tadeo raised some good points around how this role is maybe placed, the responsibility is normally placed in others, and I think that just in other jurisdictions, and that just highlights the importance of ensuring that this subcommittee does become a permanent feature. And actually, some of the comments he made around the current sort of media organisations taking a real interest, and there's been a lot of political discourse recently. And actually, I'd just like to put on the record that I am quite sad to see the live broadcasting of BBC that was on BBC Radio Jersey that was ceased, because I know that so many tuned in, and I know that a lot of members were contacted by the public about that. And in the absence of our own sort of dedicated TV channel like they do in Westminster, that was the next best thing. So I think it is a shame. There was comments around restrictions on nationality as well. I mean, obviously, personally, I would welcome that change. I think, and Deputy Dublé raised a good point that this is also another way that people can support the work of the Assembly outside of scrutiny and government. So I think I'd like to thank members again for all of their contributions. We will take all those thoughts and comments back to the subcommittee. I'd also like to remind members that anybody can join the subcommittee, and actually we're always welcome to have more members, because it's always good to have views from across the Assembly, and often that's where a lot of ideas come from when people raise things that maybe others may not have raised before or thought of. So, sir, thank you. I hope all members will support this, and I maintain the proposition.
Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show.
So can we have the
appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on B92. I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 41 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Well, the next item is also amendment to standing orders, States Decision Tracker P93, lodged by the same committee, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to make the following amendment to the standing orders of the States of Jersey with immediate effect.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. PPC has lodged this proposition, which proposes to amend standing orders to include a new provision under the Privileges and Procedures Committee terms of reference. The proposed amendment, if approved, would allow PPC to develop and maintain, in collaboration with the government, a States Decision Tracker. The tracker would be updated every quarter and published to the States Assembly website to ensure accessibility by States members and the public. The committee believes that a States Decision Tracker will make it easier for members and the public to question ministers or committees about the implementation of decisions and to scrutinise the reasons given for delays. It would also offer more transparency around reasons as to why a decision may not have been implemented. The committee has discussed this with the Chief Minister, and it was agreed that the tracker would be administered and owned by the Members' Resources team at the States Gref and maintained through correspondence and engagement with the government. I move the proposition.
Very much. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Scott.
So just to say, I support the tracker in principle. I'm just a little concerned from the current form that I've seen of it, that it seems to come over as a general list, which we have a whole list of propositions. You know, we have propositions listed on our website, and that I understand that perhaps the intention of this is to monitor the extent to which states' decisions are actually implemented or not, so that maybe the PPC could give some consideration on whether that list might be refined, and also perhaps how you assess whether they've been implemented or not. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Tadier.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we can make a little bit fun. We've just been talking about engaging people with politics, so we could have some fun emojis or icons on it. So, for example, if you want to type in the hospital, it will come up with the wheel of death, perhaps, which we're all familiar with when it just won't load. And or it could say loading, waiting time is 10 years. Or you can reboot it if you want to. We could also have that icon where there's basically a U-turn. So any decisions that have been taken but which have then been completely reneged on by the person who moved them initially when they weren't in a certain position can have the little road sign next to it. And I'm sure there are other ideas that we could have there just to make sure that we engage with the public. So I think it's great to have a tracker, but surely we also need some decisions to be made to put into the tracker, and I think it's the latter which we might have the problem with.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. The only part of this I want to pick up on is the reference that the tracker will be updated every quarter. And I would like to ask the Chair if she believes this is sufficient, and we need to have such a slow cadence or long cadence between updates. I'm sure the Members' Resources team, as and when changes are found, especially as when states' decisions are made, even if they are not enacted, will go in the tracker. And I think the public would like to see a live tracker and not something necessarily that only reports per quarter. And my question in her summing up would be, does she feel that the wording of Part K that will be inserted actually would prevent us from being keeping a more live data thread of what the tracker has in it? Must we conform to the quarter, or is that kind of will that become our statutory longest period? Because I think that the Assembly want quick, rapid data. I think there are other threads of information, like the delay on ministerial decisions going online, that the Assembly would like far quicker, and actually members of the public would like far more up-to-date data, and I think we can be a bit more ambitious.
Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Howell.
Can I just say thank you to the Members' Resources team, because I'm sure this has taken an awful lot of work for them, and just to express the views of the Assembly, how grateful we are for their work. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Rob Ward.
Just very quickly, I think it's a very good idea. I do like the spreadsheet we've been sent. I do like a spreadsheet. I think what Deputy Alex Curtis mentioned about a live tracker is something I think to aspire to. This is a starting point. It doesn't get in the way of people. What it doesn't produce, so is this notion of government saying, hang on, we can't do that because it just takes too long and there's too much going on. There certainly hasn't been, but perhaps there will be. The other important point about this is to have real clarity on where these things are, because sometimes it could be the development of something that comes from a piece of legislation could have specific times to it. So, but I'm sure we can include that. And the other thing I'll point about this is, and this is very important, I was going to say in the last debate actually, is I think we need to be a little bit more upfront about what we do and the work that we're trying to put in and what we're trying to change. I mean, stop talking ourselves down. Just because we have debates as we've had, they may be necessary. And we make those decisions, and we make difficult decisions. And so I think there are people who come and talk to us and say, you're doing a really difficult job and you're trying your best and you're working hard at it. And I think that's important that we say that. And this may help us direct people and say, look, these are the things that are actually happening. These are the changes that are happening that affect your lives. Get involved in politics, because politics is life. It gives me an opportunity, sir, to quote the in the Assembly and say, if you can't change yourself, change the world, change yourself. That's a song that I thought of, that Deputy Joseph said. And this might actually track how we are making those changes. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, please, any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak on the proposition? I close the debate and call upon the Chair of PPC to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I thank all those who've spoken, and I thank Deputy Ward for referencing the. And I would just like to answer briefly that, yes, in answer, we have put it that it was quarterly because this is obviously very new, but I take Deputy Curtis's point that it would be good to be live. I'd have to talk to the Members' Resources team about that. And I'm sure that eventually it would become live. I'd like to thank the Members' Resources team because I do know that they have put a huge amount of work into it. Yes, Deputy Scott, we are very happy to tweak the list. As I say, it hasn't become live yet, so we will be doing that. And it's very good to have this because I think it will show the work of non-executives and the government about how much work is in the pipeline. And it's, for example, one of mine, road safety, which I think was 2020 or 21, and it kind of got lost in the mire, and that's bubbling up again to the surface at the moment. So I would just ask everybody to vote for this because I think it will help everybody across the board in this Assembly and help, as Deputy Ward said, members of the public to see just how much work actually does go on. So I ask for the appel. Thank you, sir.
That is called for. Thank you, Conrad Tarb. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on P93 and I ask the referee to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the referee to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 42 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstention. Is the adjournment called for?
So, just before we do, could
Yes,
I
of
just
course.
inform members that I would like to move P95. I know there's an error and it wasn't on the order paper, so I took that as it having been moved. Now it's back on because there was an oversight, but I would like it moved, please.
So you're going to defer it?
That's correct, thank you.
Very well. That's helpful to members. Deputy Miles.
Yes, thank you, sir. In a similar vein as a consequence of yesterday, I'd like to defer P97, the public order law, so that it can be taken through by the new minister.
Very well. So that defers. There's an absolute right to for a proposer to defer a proposition. So those two matters are deferred. Very well. Well, the Assembly will return then at 2:15 to deal with the remainder of public business.